During the elite blacksmith certification, this man suddenly pulverized his own creation, right in front of the stunned judges. The examiners thought he'd lost his mind, but he just stood there with a cold stare and spoke one sentence. "Trash like this isn't fit to bear the name of a weapon." They were baffled by such insane arrogance. How could a mere rookie act like a king? They didn't realize that he was once the world's strongest master. In his past life, he used his divine smithing skills to lead humanity to its final desperate victory. But that victory was a lie. The 6 demon gods had already turned the world into a living nightmare. The most terrifying was the god of the Sea of Destruction. Even in death, his curse drowned the planet. Thinking of that watery grave, Sehun couldn't help but let out a bitter, mocking laugh at his fate. He had fought until his last breath, only to realize he'd die in the very ocean he tried to stop. The legendary Tower of Heroes had fallen, and the world was nothing more than a graveyard of sinking ruins. Just then, a sarcastic voice cut through the air. "You talk like you did all the heavy lifting yourself." That loudmouth was Mad Dog. Beside him, the woman known as Burst Dog added her own icy, venomous insult. "A coward who hid in the back pretending to be sick shouldn't be making such grand speeches," she sneered. This squad clearly despised him. Ice Dog joined the chorus of hate, muttering insults under his cold breath. "I told you guys, he was just a parasitic loser looking for a free ride on our Legion's coattails." Sehun didn't even bother looking up. Without the gear he forged, these idiots would be dead already. He was the last blacksmith, the only one who truly understood the cost of war. The trio fumed. "You little brat! Your mouth is more dangerous than your hammer." These were the notorious 3 dogs of war. Their strength was absolute, but their twisted personalities were legendary. They were true wildcards in the apocalypse. They served no master, not humanity, not the demons. They only cared about whatever profit they could scavenge. Total selfish bastards, yes, but they were survivors who fought until the world itself started to dissolve into foam. Sehun had to admit that without their raw power, the final battle would have ended in minutes. But if they'd stopped being cowards earlier, maybe the world wouldn't be underwater. Suddenly, Mad Dog collapsed. His voice was a pathetic tremble. "I'm done for. My organs. They're all nothing but mush inside me." Burst Dog and Ice Dog were also failing. Their hearts were pierced by demonic energy beyond any hope. Sehun just snorted. "If you had stepped up sooner, you wouldn't be dying in the dirt like this." These 3 dogs only cared about their own hides until the end. But then everything went silent. Mad Dog and Burst Dog had already stopped breathing. Behind them, Ice Dog lay still in the mud. A heavy weight settled in Sehun's chest. This victory felt exactly like a defeat. He gripped his hammer. He found a patch of dry ground and began to strike. For 2 hours he hammered in silence. He repaired their broken gear using the legendary weapons to mark their final resting places as gravestones. Now it was his turn. A massive wall of water loomed over him, ready to erase his existence. Sehun slowly raised his palm. He knew this would be the final time he'd ever use his secret art. He slammed his hand against his chest, reaching deep within to pull out his very essence and spirit. This was his forbidden technique bond extraction. A glowing crystal manifested in the center of his trembling palm. It was a smith's ultimate skill, turning a soul-deep connection into the rarest ore in the entire universe. The quality depended on the target's potential, but every time he used it on himself, it was garbage. If only I'd awakened this power sooner. If this fails now, then I'll truly accept my watery grave. The clanging of his hammer rhythmically matched the rising tide. Every 10 blows, a massive wave crashed nearby. Sehun's voice was lost in the roar of the sea, but his focus on the forge remained absolute. Each strike of his hammer was a desperate prayer to create something that could transcend this doomed reality. Suddenly, a blinding flash of golden light exploded. With one final blow, his final masterpiece took form. Sehun inspected the sharp blade. Its quality was legendary and its power was immense, yet he felt disappointed. It had no special soul, no hidden miracle. He had hoped for something meaningful from his own heart. But the sword was just too ordinary. It wasn't the salvation he was searching for in the end. He plunged the blade deep into his own heart. Rather than drowning, he chose to die on his terms. A bitter irony. His final masterpiece was his own end. He truly was a madman until the very finish. The abyss swallowed him as he released his last sword. In that silence, clarity finally struck like a lightning. Since awakening, phantom waves had haunted his ears. Only now did the true meaning of that sound finally surface. It was the roar of absolute destruction. If he had known, he never would have let those dogs lead. If he had fought for others just once, maybe the world would not be in these cold, dark ashes. Suddenly, system windows flickered like frantic stars before his eyes. A miracle was taking shape within the fading dark. The soul of his final sword manifested an impossible image. The ultimate skill returned to origin, roared to life. Before Sehun could process the chaos, a figure appeared. Reality shattered and then reformed around his tired soul. "What are you doing?" a voice boomed. Sehun snapped awake, gasping. Why was he back at the academy? Is this 31 years ago? Is this the legendary Babel exam? Or just a cruel, dying hallucination of home? But the heat of the forge was real. This was no illusion. Only one impossible truth remained standing now. That final sword he forged had actually triggered a miracle. The return to origin skill had truly worked wonders. Suddenly, a teacher's sharp warning cut through his shock. "Focus or get out. This isn't a playground, kid." It was true. Sehun had defied time itself. He had been sent back to the beginning of everything. If he awakened sooner and forged himself into a weapon, he could finally crush that tragic broken ending. Without a second thought, Sehun gripped the heavy hammer. The past was gone. Only the future mattered now. He had to seize this second chance with everything he had. A cold, determined smile played on his lips. This time, he would lose nothing. The road to humanity's salvation would start right here at this very anvil. He would pass Babel's test, tame those 3 dogs, and save humanity. The hammer fell with a thunderous ring. That single strike echoed with a depth that froze the room. The instructor's expression turned to one of shock. He turned, sensing a monster in their midst. Every rhythmic strike of the hammer sounded like destiny calling out. The sight sent shivers down every spine in the hall. It was a hypnotic dance of steel and fire. His movements were deceptively slow, yet every impact was ruthless. The sound was hauntingly crisp and perfectly clean. To the instructor, Sehun's fundamentals weren't just solid, they were terrifying. This wasn't the skill of a student. The man couldn't pull his eyes away, standing frozen as he watched. Then Sehun lifted his half-finished blade. The entire room fell silent at the sheer quality of the work. Disbelief etched itself onto every single face. Another instructor gasped, his breath hitching. A true monster had descended upon this year's entrance exam for the academy. He could have passed right then with that incomplete work. But Sehun was far from finished with them. In a shocking move, Sehun swung his hammer and shattered his work. The instructors could only watch horrified. "I have a long way to go." Sehun chuckled darkly. He wouldn't let such trash bear his name. He looked down at the scrap metal with pure disdain. To be honest, that piece was an absolute failure. "What do you think this exam is?" the instructor roared. But Sehun's next words silenced the entire hall. "I request a redo," he stated calmly. Before anyone could object, a powerful voice cut through the rising tension. "Give him everything he needs. I want to see what this boy is truly capable of creating here today." Armed with fresh materials, Sehun reignited the forge. His current body was weak, lacking the mana he needed. Creating a legendary weapon seemed impossible with his limited strength. Time and energy were both running dangerously low now. Under these desperate circumstances, he had only one play left. No one could grasp the madness he was planning. They watched in horror as he channeled raw magic into the ignition stone. One slip would blow them up. It was a gamble against death itself in the hall. He threw all the materials into the furnace at once. Blinding 7-colored flames erupted from the furnace like a dragon's breath. The brilliance was almost too much to behold. Panic flared as candidates scrambled for cover, fearing an explosion. Some even reached for extinguishers in their blind terror. Even the assistant panicked, but the head instructor blocked his path. He sensed something legendary happening in those flames. "Watch closely," the instructor whispered. Sehun wasn't being reckless. He was performing an ancient forbidden art of forging. He was wielding the five-colored flame demon technique, a skill that should not exist in a place like this. Witness the chromatic hellfire, using 5 resonance stones. Lee Sehun ignited a flame of impossible intensity. This required god-tier mana control. However, the payoff was huge, yielding massive heat with barely any energy spent. The crowd gasped, shocked it hadn't detonated. Then they noticed the furnace itself was glowing in strange colors. The instructor realized the truth. He wasn't just boosting the heat. He was fundamentally altering the ingot's properties. The teacher saw through his plan. Lee Sehun was recklessly pushing his limits to slash the forging time. Even with this gamble, 300 minutes was a brutal deadline. Lee Hun's earlier display was impressive, sure. But if this was his ceiling, he'd never make it. Still, he kept swinging, refusing to let up. He hammered the stone relentlessly. The suffocating pressure of time made every single breath feel like lead. After 90 grueling minutes, he finally flattened the smelted stone. Lee Hun's heart skipped. The real work began now. It was time for the final phase. He plunged the sheet back into the furnace for one last melt. Once the glow was perfect, he pulled it out. Every rhythmic strike began to forge a legendary silhouette. Suddenly, disaster struck. The skin between his thumb and index finger tore wide open under the strain. He cursed silently. His mana was bone dry, and his protective barrier had finally flickered out of existence. He needed medical training ASAP, but quitting wasn't an option. He gripped the hammer even tighter, ignoring the pain. Lee Sehun swung like a man possessed. At this stage, losing even 1 second meant absolute failure. He pushed his physical shell past its breaking point. With only minutes left, the finish line was finally visible. His hands became a blur, reaching maximum velocity as he ground the edge to a lethal sharpness. With the last of his strength, he aligned the blade's spine. Time had practically run out on the clock. As the countdown hit 0, Lee Sehun exhaled. His hands were caked in dried blood, but he didn't care. He had done it. He forged a perfect blade and unlocked the legendary flame craftsman skill. Behold the 5-colored flame blade. A high-grade curved masterpiece engraved with 5 ancient flickering flame sigils. These patterns react to mana, causing the steel to bloom into a vivid, multicolored spectacle of power. This weapon is a true mirror of its creator's potential. It evolves alongside the wielder's unique magic. Depending on the mana infused, its colors and properties shift subtly. The observer stood frozen in absolute disbelief. A high-grade evaluation unheard of. The assistant rushed forward, desperate to announce the shocking result. He opened his mouth to declare Lee Sehun's victory, but the instructor instantly silenced him with a hand. "Quiet, you're too loud," the teacher snapped. 10 minutes later, Lee Sehun entered the private faculty office. After a brief talk, the teacher was stunned. Lee Sehun was actually disappointed with his masterpiece. The instructor made a shocking call. He told the boy to withdraw his application and leave the academy. He claimed Babel couldn't handle his talent. Their forging department was prestigious but lacked any real spark. Babel had a legendary name, sure, but their smiths hadn't achieved anything noteworthy in years. Lee Sehun didn't argue. He knew the future Babel's forging wing would eventually collapse from its own mediocrity. The future's true powerhouse was Vulcan Academy. That's where the instructor wanted to send his new prodigy. But before the teacher could finish his pitch, Lee Sehun cut him off with a sharp look. "Professor, you've got it wrong. Babel won't be second-rate. It'll be the best because I'm joining it." The professor stared speechless. He was looking at a young man fueled by his own forgotten dreams. "If you're serious, you'll have to become the Academy's absolute king. Can you actually handle that?" Lee Sehun remained ice-cold and composed. "That won't be an issue. No student here can match me." Intrigued, the professor leaned in. "Then tell me, do you know how Babel picks its top freshmen?" Of course he knew. The departments select their 2 best elites for a brutal high-stakes elimination test. They fight for a leadership spot until only one ultimate representative stands at the very top. Babel Academy is a massive jungle of specialized training departments, all vying for total dominance. The combat department rules the school, supported by various branches that spread out like massive tree roots. To reach the peak, you need more than power. You need the Academy's official seal of supreme talent. As Lee Sehun finished his explanation, the professor felt a shiver of excitement run down his arm. With a slight tremor, he spoke. Listen, this isn't a professor's command, but an old smith's wisdom. Standing out at the academy is one thing, but succeeding as a true master here is brutal. Transfer to Vulcan Academy. The professor urged him, knowing that path was far safer and more suitable. Lee Sehun only offered a faint smile. In that moment, he realized this professor was actually decent. He prioritized the future of his students over his own ego or saving face in the department. Sehun declared that the environment wouldn't hinder him. He meant every word he said before. He chose Babel, and he intended to transform it into the world's absolute peak academy. The professor realized Sehun's true meaning. Wherever he stood, that place would become the strongest. It wasn't just confidence. It was a bold declaration of war. Slowly, the professor reached out. This was pure, unadulterated arrogance, yet for some reason the old man didn't hate it at all. Smiling, he shook Sehun's hand. From now on, I'm in your care. Suddenly, Sehun's skill ignited. A spiritual bond formed instantly between them. Lee Sehun returned the smile with predatory grace. Professor, I look forward to working with you. A system alert chimed bond established with Kim and Chul. Sehun's unique bond ability reached level 1. As night fell, he returned home to begin his work. He activated bond extraction. Suddenly, a rare piece of metallic ore manifested within his glowing palm. Sehun inspected the prize. It was a rare material, a core pulsing with raw flame attributes. System alert extinguishing smelt iron acquired. Rare quality high-grade metal with unique fire-nullifying properties. Compared to his past life's treasures, it was inferior, yet it was a solid start for now. The sample was tiny, though. High-tier rare materials clearly wouldn't just fall from the sky. Bond extraction quantified his connections, manifesting entirely new ores the world had never witnessed before. However, his low level limited the skill's potential. He needed to grow stronger and fast. Compared to his peers, Sehun's current base stats were embarrassingly low. He had a long road ahead. Though he lacked much, returning to the past was a gift he wouldn't dare complain about. He couldn't afford to rush. Recklessness would only lead to a disastrous ruin of his plans. A strict training regime was vital. Once he regained his peak, he'd crush the Demon Legion. Those monsters didn't just threaten humanity. They were a cancer eating the entire planet alive. 6 demon gods were driving everyone toward extinction, dragging the world into a bottomless abyss. To stop them, Sehun would use any method necessary. He needed his memories to remain razor-sharp. The future's turning points were approaching. He couldn't let his knowledge fade into a blur. His priorities shifted: obtain memory-related artifacts or skills. Phase 1 of the plan was a success. He was in the academy. Next up, the 3 dogs. Suddenly, a system ping broke his focus. His eyes widened as the message appeared. His level had officially hit level 1. Bond engraving unlocked. 1 week later, the scene shifted to the hallowed halls of Babel Academy. Sehun had spent days navigating the grounds. 30 years had changed the layout significantly. Eventually, he located the smithy, today's testing grounds. 2 tables stood ready for the examinees. Beside him stood a rival candidate. Ahead, the examiner sat at the high-scoring desk. The examiner tapped a rhythm, eyeing him. You look awfully calm, not feeling the pressure. He then shot a sharp, annoyed look at the professor. Everyone else is waiting, you know. It was the vice dean speaking. The professor sighed, refusing to entertain the man's petty attitude. Vice dean, the test starts in 5 minutes. The 2 scholars continued their endless bickering. Sehun watched speechless. It wasn't just the forging department that was a total mess. Their relationship with the higher-ups was toxic. No wonder the professor suggested he leave yesterday. The politics here were dangerous. Even the student beside him radiated a terrifying, murderous intent. One look confirmed it. This guy was a predator who refused to accept any form of defeat. Still, Sehun maintained his manners. It's a pleasure to meet you, he said. Just as he suspected, the punk didn't just ignore him. He looked at him like he was literal garbage. Lee Sehun was beyond annoyed. He hadn't even done anything yet. Suddenly, a sharp, icy female voice echoed through the chamber. In an instant, every head in the room snapped toward the source. The vice dean spoke up as she took her seat. I wondered when you'd arrive, department head. But when Lee Sehun saw her face, his entire world ground to a halt. He knew that face far too well. Meeting her again like this was a total shock. There she was, the red-haired beauty with the razor-sharp gaze. It was the dean of Babel Academy, Ryuha. Lee Sehun froze. What was this legendary glutton doing here? She was already a world-renowned S-rank hero, famous for her unique ability to devour weapons for strength. Before his rebirth, she was a regular client who had relied on his craftsmanship for years. But Ryuha hadn't survived the final war. Before she fell, her final words to Lee Sehun were tragic. She regretted eating the sword he had forged. In that moment, Lee Sehun felt his heart shatter. Humanity had lost its greatest shield. Ryuha's combat prowess back then had been truly god tier. She had single-handedly held the front lines against the demonic deities. Suddenly, his thoughts were cut short. The examiner slammed his desk, ordering him to focus. It was time for the rules. You have exactly 90 minutes. The gear you forge must complement the sword from the previous trial. As the examiner spoke, he raised a clenched fist. In a flash, a violent flame erupted from his palm. For this test, you are restricted to alchemy-based forging alone. The teacher scanned the materials below. A massive pile of raw ore was laid out across the floor for the taking. You can combine any materials you choose, but remember your work will be judged by Ryuha herself. So don't hold back. Give them something legendary. With a sharp gesture, the exam officially roared to life. The arrogant brat next to Lee Sehun sneered, but Sehun didn't even give him a second glance. This sudden trial would only have one winner. Lee Sehun tightened his apron and began his hunt for ore. As he sifted through the materials, the blonde punk couldn't stop running his mouth. You have to resonate pure mana with the ore to control the elements. Do you think staring at it helps? Do you really think your magic power will just wake up on its own? Lee Sehun shot him a look. What he chose was none of this clown's business. Who gave him the right to act so superior? The punk's tone turned even more venomous. Trash like you doesn't even belong in this room. Just then, a professor rushed over to Hans Balmouth. He warned him to shut up and focus on his work. Only then did Hans finally pipe down, but when Lee Sehun heard that name, he stopped cold. No wonder the vice dean and this kid looked so similar. They were father and son. The whole situation was becoming a total joke. The kid noticed the flash of anger on Sehun's face. Instead of backing off, he became even more smug. So you finally figured out who I am? To him, Lee Sehun was just a lowly commoner with pathetic magic and zero status. Meanwhile, he was the heir to the prestigious Balmouth family, a clan of alchemical forging masters. Hans Balmouth began his selection convinced that competing with a nobody was a massive waste of time. In his mind, the crown was already his. Seated at the center, Ryuha let out a cold hum. Lapis lazuli and aquamarine jade. Those are high-capacity magic materials. The vice dean cut in immediately. Exactly. They're premium materials perfectly infused with water magic. The professor's heart sank as he listened. Water-based materials were incredibly volatile when exposed to fire. Refining them was a nightmare. Was this kid really that confident or just incredibly reckless? The vice dean just sneered. Your thinking is outdated. Alchemy has evolved beyond your old-school methods. The professor had to admit he had a point. Modern alchemy wasn't bound by traditional rules anymore. But since every caster's mana is different, the synthesis time could fluctuate wildly. Given the strict 90-minute limit, it was a massive gamble, but the vice dean didn't care to argue. He knew the truth: his genius son could synthesize any ore in just a matter of minutes. Hans Balmouth kicked off his synthesis, summoning a shimmering magic sphere into the air. Ores hung suspended as his resonance took hold a feat far beyond any normal freshman. Rivaling second-year elites, his raw efficiency left the professor absolutely stunned. It was clear now the entire exam was a setup meticulously rigged from the start. This was biased toward Hans. The professor glared at the vice dean, cursing that old fox. Meanwhile, Ryunha's gaze was glued to Lee Sehun, her eyes widening in mounting shock. Sehun had picked volatile ores, red hydromemonite, and a lethal fire-red stone. The examiners watched intensely. These were high-capacity fire counterparts to legendary jewels. Yet the vice dean saw only arrogance, completely blind to Sehun's true hidden potential. To him, only his son deserved pride. Sehun's confidence was just a personal insult. Even Hans noticed Sehun's movements, assuming the boy was just desperately trying to compete. He mocked Sehun's stupidity, certain his puny mana pool would fail him any second. "There's no way he can control that stone," Hans sneered, feeling more superior than ever. He was convinced Sehun was a delusional clown. This victory was going to be effortless. But then Sehun's eyes ignited as he unleashed his secret, the bond engraving skill. The link of fire roared to life, channeling massive heat through his very limbs. Intense flames erupted from Sehun's fists, his arms becoming conduits for pure elemental power. A spark flickered, then exploded into a violent blaze that consumed half his arm. Hans's face paled. He tried to dismiss the scene as a cheap, meaningless trick. But Sehun simply flicked his wrist, controlling the roaring flames with terrifying precision. With a snap of his fingers, the high-grade ores rose, dancing within the heat. Everything was proceeding flawlessly, following his cold, calculated plan without a single error. At this blistering pace, the weapon would be finished in a matter of heartbeats. The Dean's eyes narrowed, forcing resonance between identical attributes that was pure madness. Such volatile ores required pure mana, otherwise the magic would spiral into an explosion. The Dean waited for disaster, a cruel smirk tugging at the corner of his mouth. He relished the thought of failure. This idiot was about to cause a catastrophe. But Sehun didn't break. Instead, he ramped up the power-pushing limits even further. A monstrous aura exploded from the ores, sweeping through the entire room like a tidal wave. The heat was blinding. The professor and Ryuna shielded their eyes from the glare. The Dean stood frozen, his jaw dropping as he witnessed the impossible unfolding. Amidst 5 pillars of fire, a crystal-clear sword scabbard began to manifest beautifully. Sehun exhaled. For him, this was basic work. His only struggle was his limited mana. He reached into the flames, snatching his newly forged masterpiece right out of the air. Suddenly, the system chimed. "Congratulations, you've forged the Flame Sword, Scabbard Super Rare." The room went silent. The professor and Ryuna were paralyzed by sheer unadulterated shock. Even the arrogant Dean couldn't believe his eyes. This shouldn't have been possible. He realized even he couldn't craft something this divine. It was a true masterwork. It carried a legendary flame-layering effect. Hans froze his own work, grinding to a halt. Sehun had finished first. Hans couldn't process how Sehun was both faster and better. Why didn't he explode? Hans wondered, his entire worldview shattering into a million pieces. In his panic, Hans's own magic wavered. His steady rhythm collapsed into chaotic desperation. "Stop it now!" the Vice Dean screamed. "Your magic is going to trigger an explosion." Hans's magic sphere began to vibrate violently, cracks spiderwebbing across its glowing surface. Boom! A burst of gas blasted his face as his pride and synthesis literally shattered. Total disaster. With a violent explosion, Hans Barrett's forging process spiraled out of control. Within 15 minutes, the magic stone shattered into worthless dust. Hans's face twisted in pure, agonizing defeat. This crucial exam had been destroyed by his own clumsy hands. Typically, the judges would now crown the superior victor. But Professor Kim was stuck. The other student hadn't even presented a finished product yet. And after being rattled by his opponent's insane performance, he had failed completely. Regret clouded the professor's eyes. Hans hung his head, fighting back bitter tears. All those months of training had just gone up in smoke. Blood dripped from his injured arm, but the physical pain was nothing compared to losing without a true fight. Suddenly, the Dean's eyes gleamed with a dirty trick. He adjusted his suit, masking his malice with fake concern. "Since a student is hurt, we must cancel this exam immediately and reschedule," he declared smoothly. Professor Kim shot back instantly. "We cannot just stop an official exam that is already in progress." In the end, this was caused by Hans's own pathetic incompetence, wasn't it? The Dean smirked shamelessly. "So you value grades over a student's life, Kim?" The Dean's venomous words left the professor speechless. Outranked and disgusted, Kim fell silent. The Dean pressed on, targeting the miracle they had just witnessed. The world record for resonance is 5 minutes, yet this boy supposedly synthesized materials in only 6. He pointed a finger at Lee Sehun. "A mere freshman performing instant resonance. It is a total impossibility. To claim he resonated the second he touched the stone. No sane person would ever believe such a lie. Alchemical forging is the art of defying physics, molding weapons with magic where standard hammers always fail. It isn't about the old ways of sweating over an anvil or pouring one's soul into the metal. It is about touching the ore's soul and awakening its hidden vitality. That is the true alchemical essence. Sehun had mastered that essence perfectly, reaching the answer modern masters were still desperately chasing. Soon, this revolutionary method would be the standard, making his technique a logical step rather than a secret. Facing the old snake trying to suppress him, Sehun had zero interest in giving an explanation. He only stared back with ice in his eyes. "I have no clue what you're ranting about," he replied. The dean barked a laugh. "Plain dumb. You clearly used some forbidden, disgraceful trick to win this. A nobody freshman forging a rare weapon. Your cheating is an insult." Those words finally pushed Sehun too far. "Who do you think you are?" he growled. Suddenly Ryuha stood up. "He's right. This is absolutely ridiculous." The dean smirked, thinking he had an ally. "Exactly. Department head. You see how absurd this is, right? Disqualify this cheater and reset the test." But Ryuha did not even acknowledge the man's existence. She brushed past him like he was invisible, her eyes locked onto the scabbard Sehun had just created. As her fingers grazed the metal, a jolt of extraordinary and unusual energy surged through her entire body. It was a sensation unheard of in alchemy records. Sehun had achieved something truly legendary. Then something insane happened. A drop of drool actually escaped the corner of her mouth. She pointed a trembling finger at the boy. "Student Sehun, may I ask you a question?" She wanted to take a bite of the scabbard, or at least lick it once. The dean froze in horror. Professor Kim stared in shock. He knew Ryuha had unique habits, but this was beyond awkward. A heavy, painful silence filled the room. By the time Sehun finally stepped outside, the sun was setting. The results were left in limbo. He was simply told to head home and wait for a notification. Still, the process had gone smoothly. He had casually forged a super rare weapon, as if it were nothing. It was a solid piece, though. He felt the finer details were still a bit too rough for his taste. But seeing the dean shaking with impotent fury, that was more than enough to satisfy him. He had felt the man's venom from the start. Now the score was finally starting to settle. Suddenly, the name Barrett rang a bell. Sehun scratched his head, digging through memories of his past life. Then it clicked. Back at Babel, a comrade named Burst Dog had once mentioned that very name. That scumbag had exploited her for slave labor while stripping the value of her weapons to nothing. Those sabotaged weapons eventually exploded, and the magical backlash devastated her life because of his greed. That moment marked her descent into a dark destiny. If that monster hadn't intervened, she wouldn't have been forced into those cybernetic modifications. Even back then, Sehun felt a pang of guilt for the one they called Burst Dog. Lost in these heavy memories, he finally halted his steps. The cruel blacksmith who crippled Burst Dog for life went by the name Borant. That name Hans Borant meant was synonymous with pure evil. A truly wretched soul who thrived on misery. In this second chance at life, Sehun's top mission was to find the three dogs early. He needed to steer them away from their tragic paths before it was too late. If he succeeded, one more soul would be saved from despair. By keeping the villainous Hans on a tight leash, he could prevent Burst Dog from spiraling into a mindless beast of destruction. With that settled, he just had to wait for the next move. Meanwhile, tension reached a breaking point inside the Academy's High Council room. The air was thick with unease at Babel Academy. The dean had just made a shocking move, elevating Sehun to a top-tier rank. Ryuha watched the professor's grim faces, knowing her decree was a massive shock to the established order. She was forcing their hand. But within these walls, Ryuha was the ultimate authority. Her word was absolute law, and no one dared to defy her iron will openly. Terrified of her wrath, the staff couldn't challenge her directly. Instead, they tried to undermine her through subtle hints and cautious suggestions. They whispered their doubts, pointing out that Ryuha was still new to her role. Her bold move lacked the traditional grace of a leader. Ryuha saw right through their pathetic games. She knew the vice dean had been hungrily eyeing her throne from the very beginning. The vice dean finally spoke up, and his lackeys were quick to join the chorus. They claimed Sehun's weapon needed far more scrutiny. They argued that despite its flashiness, the blade was suspicious. Professor Kim, however, stepped forward to defend the young prodigy's work. He told them they were blind to Sehun's true genius. They hadn't witnessed the sheer majesty of his flame-layered scabbard in person. While the craft had minor imperfections, his mana control was otherworldly. His synergy with the five-colored flame blade was nothing short of perfection. Skeptics still shook their heads in disbelief. They refused to accept that a mere student could ever reach such legendary heights. Ryuha silenced the room with a sharp glare. She admitted his current work was only at 60% of its full potential. Yet it was that very untapped potential that set her heart racing. Then she dropped a second, even more explosive bombshell. She challenged them all if Sehun's upcoming demonstration didn't leave them speechless. She would personally step down from her position as dean. The room fell into a deathly silence. No one imagined Ryuha would gamble her entire career on a single student's performance. She had staked everything. This conflict traced back 54 years, when the heavens descended to push humanity toward a new evolution. They gifted us the Tower of Heroes, but the Abyss retaliated, unleashing a demonic legion that sought to corrupt all living things. In that clash of miracles and nightmares, Babel was born, the greatest academy to ever rise from the depths of the Pacific. From its halls, legendary champions rose to save the world. Legends like the enthroned Emperor Ludwig Schubert first carved their names here. Every student present carried the hope of becoming the next world-class hero. On the grand stage, an old man addressed the crowd. He urged the freshmen to keep moving forward, claiming it was their sacred duty as heroes to conquer the heights of Babel. Sehun smirked at the empty words. Their real duty wasn't climbing. It was surviving the bloodbath against the demon legion that lay ahead. Still, he knew Emperor Ludwig was a decent man. He might not be this gentle in battle, but his intentions were always pure. Suddenly, the host grabbed the mic, signaling the start of the main event, the highly anticipated top freshman combat demonstration. The elite students from every department began to file onto the stage. Sehun watched them with a cold, calculating gaze. In his past life, these geniuses lived for the spotlight and the glory, but in this timeline, the stage finally belonged to him. Now it was his time to shine. 3 specific students were chosen to lead the assembly's demonstration, including the regressor himself. As a massive mechanical device was rolled out, Sehun realized exactly what was happening. The academy was about to put on a show. The academy's vanity knew no bounds. With a dramatic flourish, the host introduced the target for today's high-stakes combat trial. It was a cutting-edge weapon of war, a high-spec automaton. This machine was a Graham model, a product of the legendary Puppet Factory. It possessed enough raw power to trade blows with a high-ranking hero. This was a pure combat machine built solely for destruction. Lacking special weapons, it relied on brutal, close-quarters combat. The host's voice crackled with excitement as he introduced the first contender. The first genius to step up was Jack Myers. He was the reigning champion of the Alkoff Academy, a monster in human skin. As Jack walked into the light, a heavy silence smothered the hall. Sehun recognized him immediately as the heir to a legendary house. He was the third son of the prestigious Myers family, born with a sword in his hand. But he was more than a noble. Jack was a true battle maniac who lived for the thrill of the kill. He took his stance, determined to make this a flawless victory. Suddenly, the automaton's eyes flared a menacing crimson. The host dropped his hand and the signal for the carnage was given. In a heartbeat, the machine lunged. Its speed was terrifyingly explosive, closing the gap in the blink of an eye. Myers stood right before the metal beast. The robot lunged, but his fist sliced through the air with a deafening roar. He evaded every strike with ghostly grace. His agility was purely on another level, leaving the audience breathless. The mechanical fist hit nothing as Myers vanished. He reappeared instantly, standing 10 meters back from the confused machine. He had already mapped out the machine's rhythm. Now it was time for a brutal and decisive counterattack. Like a cannonball, he surged forward. He roared, channeling every ounce of his power into his right hand. 15 years of training is in this strike. Can you handle it? He bellowed as his fist connected with the hull. The impact was seismic. The crowd sat paralyzed as the robot buckled under that insane and exaggerated force. Metal plates shattered like glass. Watching from the sidelines, Sehun felt a cold chill run down his spine. In his memory, Myers was just an A-rank hero who died in his 20s. This power didn't match at all. This was a once-in-10-years genius. Sehun couldn't understand how such talent could have failed before. Why did he hit a wall in his previous life? Myers just smirked, knowing the first strike was just the start. His second blow completely pulverized the machine. The robot's severed head thudded heavily onto the concrete floor. Myers finally exhaled, feeling the thrill of battle. The host stood there, his jaw practically hitting the floor. It was pure carnage. He decimated a C-rank level combat robot in the blink of an eye with zero effort. Myers gave a casual wave to the fans. Nothing special, he joked. This C-rank machine was just too flimsy. His opening act turned the atmosphere heavy. The students waiting in the wings felt the crushing weight of expectation. Suddenly, a cold presence drifted past Lee Se-hun's vision. He watched as a mysterious figure stepped onto the floor. It was Inoi Eric, the legendary top student. She was the heiress of one of Japan's 3 great warrior houses. Though she wasn't a full clearer, her myth-grade weapon made her a rising superstar in the hero world. Sehun knew her destiny ended in darkness as a demon retainer. Getting close to her was incredibly dangerous. Yet her power was too tempting to ignore. He desperately wanted to pull her into his own secret camp. Suddenly, Eric spun around, her piercing gaze locking onto Lee Se-hun. He froze, stunned by her sudden attention. Why is she looking at me? He wondered. At this point in time, they should be total strangers. Shaking off the confusion, he focused on her. Her target robot had been reinforced with double-plated armor for this test. The host shouted into the mic, "What kind of miracle will student Inoi deliver? Let's find out." Inoi calmly raised a small cage, revealing a mechanical crow with chilling sapphire blue eyes. Strangely, that bird shared the exact same cold and icy intensity as Eric's own gaze. "Go," she whispered softly. Like a blue streak of lightning, the crow launched itself toward the mechanical foe. It soared upward, gaining altitude with impossible speed. Lee Se-hun frowned, wondering how a single bird could fight. Could one crow really take down a heavy-duty machine? The bird kept rising as the robot stayed perfectly still. The robot's targeting was locked. It could only strike the bird and was forbidden from attacking Eric herself. It shifted into its ultimate defensive shell. Once in that mode, breaking through was considered nearly impossible. It was a literal fortress of steel. Eric simply took a slow, steady breath as the crow reached its peak. Suddenly, blue energy flared from the crow's eyes. It dived down like a general leading a grand charge. It dived with such velocity that afterimages blurred the air. The impact was faster than the eye could follow. It was a relentless storm strike rise and dive. It was an unbroken lethal chain of attacks. Eric didn't even move an inch, yet she was exerting total dominance over the entire battlefield. Lee Se-hun watched in awe as the crow drilled straight through the robot's reinforced chestplate like a drill. The invincible defense was shredded like wet paper against those mythical talons. It was a total slaughter. The massive machine collapsed to its knees. With a whistle, Eric called the bird back to its ordinary form. The stadium went wild. She'd pierced the ultimate reinforced automaton with just one elegant combo sequence. Lion felt sweat bead on his forehead. She could walk away a hero, but his trial was just beginning. If he didn't pull off something legendary now, the crowd would boo him right off the stage. Finally, it was time for the Technical Academy's top prospect Bulipa to step into the spotlight. High above the instructor's side, this year's freshmen were proving to be absolute terrifying monsters. It had been ages since the forging department birthed a genius of this caliber. Hopefully, the immense weight of those expectations wouldn't crush Lee Se-hun. Ryu-ha sat beside Shuber, acting as the lead supervisor today. She knew Lee Se-hun had this in the bag, yet her heart kept thumping faster. Slowly, Lee Se-hun unsheathed his weapon. It was showtime. His masterpiece, that sleek blade and sheath, stood displayed for all to see. The crowd instantly erupted in shock. A rare grade. Since when? Did the forging department produce such treasures? A freshman wielding a rare weapon was pure madness. The dean smirked, feeling like luck was finally on his side. At this rate, the top spot at Babel Academy would soon be his. Glaring at Ryu-ha, he thought, "Pack your bags and leave. Just surrender your title. Meanwhile, on the center stage, Lee Sehun requested the host upgrade to Model 8. He even asked for double armor plating to truly push his limits. The host froze, completely blindsided. Did this kid even realize what he was? Asking Model 8 could tank hits from a B-rank hero, yet Lee Sehun wanted even more protection. Lacking the power to grant such a request, the host hesitated, visibly sweating. He tried to steer Lee Sehun toward Model 10 instead. This last-minute change was too much to prep, but suddenly, Professor Kim's voice boomed from the back. He rolled out a reinforced combat bot, and even higher tier capable of enduring A- rank hero assaults. It was total overkill compared to a B rank. The host was speechless, unable to fix the chaos. The situation was spiraling fast. Even Lee Sehun felt a bit shocked. Professor Kim really went there. He actually understood his student's drive. The professor crossed his arms, staring Lee Sehun down. "Give them hell," his gaze screamed. Lee Sehun understood the message perfectly. Seeing the gear was set, the host stopped worrying and let things play out. His job was simply to start the round. As it began, Ryuha watched Lee Sehun like a hawk, eager to see his peak. She only hoped for one thing: the more explosive, the better. Lee Sehun's eyes sharpened. Failure wasn't an option. He drew his blade, settling into a deadly yaijutsu stance. The moment steel left the sheath, 5 colored flames erupted with blinding light. The combat bot shifted into a full defensive stance. From the sidelines, Meyer hollered in excitement, "This is crazy, I can't wait." But Hans, still bitter from his defeat, looked on with a pure contempt. "Just flashy tricks," he sneered. To him, Lee Sehun was just a weakling, lacking real mana. The energies within the 5-colored blade were chaotic. If they flared up, without perfect magic control, the user would be vaporized by the backlash. Using the flame-stacking sheath, he shredded the fire and crushed it into a dense core. Lee Sehun activated Flame Craftsman, flooding the blade with crimson fire to stabilize the volatile energy. His preparation was finished. Across from him, the machine sat locked in a fortress of steel, waiting for the first strike. Suddenly, Lee Sehun unleashed the wildfire trapped within his scabbard. Pushing his mana to the absolute breaking point, the wildfire skill of the flame-layered sheath instantly ignited the condensed energy. When triggered like this, the compressed 5-colored fragments detonated simultaneously. The professors in the stands were completely floored by the display. How could a mere student wield such raw power? Even the host felt a terrifying pressure suffocating the room. Following that devastating slash, Lee Sehun stepped forward calmly. With a sharp flick, he returned the blade to its home. Seeing the carnage, even Lee Sehun felt a chill, realizing he'd overdone it. Before him, the solid floor was ripped apart, forming a deep, jagged trench. The raw sword energy had carved through reality itself. The host stood paralyzed. This transcended all logic. The principal quickly ordered a repair crew to fix the shattered hall. With that, the legendary midterm demonstration concluded. Later, the rhythmic click of high heels echoed through the hallway. Lee Sehun waited on the sofa for Ryuha. A moment later, she entered. "Sorry for the delay, I was busy clearing the wreckage." Those words made Lee Sehun feel sheepish. He was the one who should apologize for the destruction he'd caused. Ryuha froze as the tension spiked. He'd pushed too far. "Wait, what are you saying? I didn't come here to scold you." Lee Sehun realized she wasn't looking for a fight. Ryuha quickly tried to explain herself. "It's a misunderstanding. I had another reason for calling you." Suddenly, an audible growl echoed from her stomach. Lee Sehun knew her secret hunger, but he kept quiet. It wasn't public knowledge yet. She was clearly eyeing his gear. She cleared her throat awkwardly. "Listen, I'll pay 10 times the market value for those weapons of yours." She was desperate for his 5-colored flame blade, but Lee Sehun wasn't interested in the deal. He had to refuse. He wouldn't part with them for any price. Suddenly, a familiar blue window flickered before his eyes. A connection established. Ryuha lunged forward, grabbing his hand. The level 1 bond was forged instantly. "That gear, it's breathtaking," she whispered. "I need it. Please name your price." Lee Sehun was stunned by her intensity. This was moving way too fast. In his past life, This bond only manifested after she'd consumed countless weapons, and her body began to fail. But this time, the timeline had shifted. This was a golden opportunity he couldn't afford to waste. Without hesitation, Sehun triggered bond extraction. Ethereal blue mana swirled around their locked hands like a cyclone. Bond extracted. The system announced his success. He had obtained the legendary Iron of Greed. This top-tier metal was a monster. It generated intense heat by consuming other metals, melting everything it touched. It absorbed alloys to grow stronger. A jagged black and red sphere materialized in Sehun's palm. The puzzle pieces fit. Ryunha's eyes shimmered with hope. "So you'll sell it? Just say the word." But Sehun shook his head. "You've got it wrong," he countered. Suddenly, a stern voice interrupted them from the hallway. The moment was gone. Professor Kim stepped in, announcing that the principal's ceremony was starting. Sehun needed to leave immediately. Disappointment clouded Ryunha's features as she sighed. "Fine. Go on ahead. We'll finish this later." Sehun left her with a simple promise. Until next time. Once he was gone, her stomach growled fiercely again. Her hunger for high-grade steel was becoming unbearable. Meanwhile, at the heart of the prestigious Babel Academy, inside the grand Bardock Manor, Sehun followed the professor toward the inner sanctum, the principal's private office. "Watch your tongue," Kim warned. "The principal is a legend. He overlooked the training hall damage, but don't push it. He's not just some official, he's a god among men. Do not dare to disrespect him." Sehun simply nodded, his expression calm. He was a master of reading people. He knew exactly how to play this. The door opened to reveal the principal. "So you're the famous Sehun." His voice carried a heavy weight of authority. This man was a living legend who in the original timeline had sacrificed himself to take down the sixth demon god. He was a full clear ranker, a tier above all others. The old hero studied the young student with piercing eyes. "Your work today was impressive," the principal began. "Not quite perfect, but your potential is staggering to witness." Sehun narrowed his eyes at the mention of flaws. His perfectionist nature flared up. He wanted to refine them now. He resisted the urge to toss his blade back into the forge. The Academy's elites were finally noticing his worth. His hard work had paid off. To honor his achievements, the principal offered him 2 special rewards of his choosing. Sehun's heart thrummed with excitement. This was his chance. He knew exactly what he needed to ascend further. He requested artifacts to bolster his mana capacity and perfect his memory. The principal gave a knowing smile. With a slow wave of his hand, the principal tore through the fabric of reality, revealing a shimmering golden gateway. Beyond the portal lay a forgotten ruin. From the golden light, 2 ancient treasures descended like falling stars. One held the power to consume all but the purest shadows. The other radiated a mystic, dreamlike energy. It was magic that blurred the line between dreams and reality. Sehun felt a jolt of pure shock. Shadow-type items were rare, but dream attribute mana was legendary. These were priceless artifacts beyond any market value. They were too powerful to master now, but their future potential was limitless. He could see his path to godhood. "Satisfied?" the principal asked warmly. "Perfectly," Sehun replied with a bow. "They are beyond my wildest expectations." As Sehun departed, the principal watched him from the balcony. Suddenly, the ancient rune began to speak. "What are you planning?" the rune whispered. "To give a mere child such rare, world-breaking treasures? It's reckless." The principal blew out a cloud of smoke. "He has the soul to handle them. He's no ordinary student." The rune hummed. "Is that all?" "Because that boy, he acts like an old soul trapped in a child's body." A single eye opened, gleaming with an unfathomable depth. The principal realized something chilling. Sehun was a monster he couldn't even begin to measure. Even with all his experience, the principal couldn't gauge the true upper limit of the boy's talent. An hour later, the atmosphere in the classroom was electric. When someone invited Hans Barmet to lunch, he declined with a smug grin, claiming he already had exclusive plans with the prestigious Senior Howard. The room went silent. Senior Howard. The top-ranked third year at Babel Academy, Hans basked in the shocked stares of his envious peers, savoring the moment. "Our families go way back," Hans boasted arrogantly. "We meet from time to time. He's giving me personal advice on dominating academy life today." As they chatted, Sehun walked into the room, his mere presence shifting the temperature. Suddenly, his gaze sharpened, locking onto Hans like a predator. He had to establish the hierarchy and make things crystal clear. Don't cause trouble. This warning concerned the fate of the three dogs. Meeting Sehun's eyes, Hans Barmit felt a soul-piercing chill. He couldn't fathom why this hostility felt heavy enough to swallow him whole. Hans felt his blood turn to ice. The intensity in those eyes was terrifying, as if they wanted to consume his very soul alive. He clearly had never provoked Sehun before. Aside from the entrance exam, this was actually their first real face-to-face meeting in person. Yet Hunaeon continued to stare him down like a vengeful ghost, a silent, terrifying warning. "If you dare stir up trouble, I'll tear you apart." When Hyun finally turned away, a subtle mocking smirk touched his lips. "At least he knows his limits. He's already trembling in my presence." Hans shook with humiliated rage. He had actually been paralyzed by a single look. A moment later, Professor Kim entered, commanding absolute silence. The professor announced that today's lecture would be a personal lesson. He lowered his voice, stating that he would be teaching the class himself. For their first class, he decided they would begin with self-introductions. Professor Kim gestured for an assistant to bring forth a rare artifact. He slowly raised a shimmering piece of projection alloy stone. This legendary ore was the key to seeing a student's true potential. This stone is dozens of times more sensitive to magic power than ordinary ore. Inject your mana and your soul's weapon will take form. In an instant, a weapon condensed in Professor Kim's hand. It was a perfect manifestation of exactly what he had envisioned in his mind. Sehun was inwardly shaken. This was the skill of a hero who had rightfully entered the world's top 100 craftsmen. He could sense that this Professor Kim was not merely impressive. The man's technique was refined through years of legendary battle and craft. Leon could even feel an abnormal pulsing fluctuation of power from his contract stone. Professor Kim continued his explanation to the stunned students. "Precisely because it is so sensitive, it is useless for actual combat," he noted. "However, it reflects traits even you haven't realized yet. It allows you to see who you truly are deep inside. That was why weapons forged from projection alloy were officially called avatars. In the forging department, you will use an avatar to introduce yourselves. Your soul's reflection will be your first mark on this academy. Your finished works will be displayed in the main building for 1 week. So do not be half-hearted. Put your full strength into this." Everyone was astonished by the stakes. A projection alloy stone of this quality was easily worth over 10 million, one apiece. Truly, Babel Academy lived up to its legendary name. Even a simple self-introduction had to be taken to this extreme, expensive level. But after many students tried, Sehun realized there was no real talent here. They were simply too weak to be worth noting. Sehun could not help sighing in disappointment. This group was practically a pack of fools compared to the geniuses of his previous life. In his eyes, they did not even qualify as scrap metal. At that moment, Sehun slowly rose to his feet to take his turn. He was the last person to go on stage for the introduction. He picked up the stone and his projection surfaced on its face instantly. Since he had already climbed to the top once there was no need to hide, he would show them the power of a true master. Since he had chosen this path, he would do it to his absolute best. He would make sure no one dared look down on him. So this time he also decided to go all out. At the very least, he would suppress these arrogant freshmen right here and now. In the next moment, a huge plume of magical smoke shot up above the building. It was the aftershock of Sehun's overflowing power. When he used the projection alloy stone, the scene shifted entirely. The sword Sehun made was placed in the prestigious exhibition hall. Everyone thought it was only an ordinary longsword at first glance, but the genius beauty of the academy took one look and froze. Her eyes lit up instantly with shock. As expected, the work of the forging department's top student was on a completely different level. Ordinary people simply could not see the divine precision of its internal structure. At the same time, Sehun was still swinging his hammer. He struck without pause, ensuring every impact was perfect. He had to ensure every strike was exact, down to the slightest fraction. All the students present were left completely dumbfounded. Up to now, he had not shown even a single second of deviation or error. The assistant behind him could not help but think in awe. What exactly could teachers like them still teach a monster like this kid? He was too outrageous to be a student. So the assistant simply skipped over Sehun, deciding not to attempt teaching him at all. An hour later, the students finally finished their assignments. Sehun began checking each of those assignments one by one with a cold eye. When he saw that row of pathetic swords, his fist tightened unconsciously. They were so terrible it seemed he would have to start from zero. I have to shatter these blades into scrap metal again. To any ordinary person, these semi-finished products were already masterpieces. But Sehun saw nothing but failure. Just as he raised his fist to crush his work, a sudden voice cut through the air. "You're breaking them again." That single question from the assistant made Sehun pause. Was destruction not the only path? The assistant was practically begging him to stop. "Don't break them. They're due right after this week's forging class. Do you know where our budget comes? From Babel funds us based on sales. What exactly are you so dissatisfied with? Is it your body, your mana, or the weapon itself?" Sehun laughed bitterly. The most critical issue was his current physical vessel. He needed to refine the legendary ink-like darkness, but his stamina was pathetic and he couldn't survive the attempt. The teaching assistant offered a sudden spark of inspiration. "For forging, wouldn't a status buff be faster than raw training?" Those words hit Sehun like a lightning bolt. The realization shattered his old common sense. In his previous life, he had been obsessed with doing things the hard way. He trapped himself. But for the current him, this was the ultimate strategy. He had regressed and his body was laughably weak. As long as he had a buff, he could finally master that darkness. Sehun called out to the teaching assistant. "Thanks for the tip." The man felt it was nothing. After all, there was little he could do. Actually teach a genius like Sehun. It was just a small suggestion. Sehun's eyes fell on the assistant's sword. The blade was rough and amateurish. "I watched your smithing earlier. Your mana consumption is way too high. Try dropping it to 30% and focus all your power on a single point." That advice alone would skyrocket the assistant's skill. It was far more effective than just pouring in raw power. Having returned the favor, Sehun walked away. The assistant stood there, face flushing with embarrassment. A freshman had just lectured a teaching assistant. Yet he took the advice to heart and stared at the hammer on the table. By the time afternoon rolled around, a Babel professor's warning echoed through the halls. The Academy encourages independent study. You can audit other courses and take multiple electives in one semester. But fail your major 3 times and you're expelled. Freedom comes with a price. Sehun's next stop was the university district. He needed something there. As the train pulled into the station, he stepped off and ran straight into Eric. 2 arrogant seniors trailing behind her immediately barked at Sehun to move and stop blocking her path. Sehun narrowed his eyes. Where did these clowns come from? Why were they acting so aggressive? And if I don't move, what then? With that challenge, the 2 seniors flared up, but Eric ignored them and asked where he was going. Sehun said he was looking for electives at the UR Academy. Eric's eyes lit up. "I'm from that academy. I'll guide you." But the senior student interrupted, saying Eric had a meeting to attend. Hearing that, Eric's voice turned ice cold on the spot. She turned to glare at the 2 of them, her anger radiating. "I'm not interested. Now get lost." The seniors froze. The way she treated Sehun versus them was like night and day. For Sehun, this was a good thing. Having a guide was better than being alone. They ignored the fuming seniors and headed back to the academy. On the way, Eric asked what kind of elective he was searching for. Sehun was direct. He wanted to buff something to strengthen his body without interfering with his forging process. Eric recommended barrier arts, but it seemed too defensive. Then she pulled an invitation from her pocket. "You've got it wrong. It's not about the art, but how you use it." She cast a barrier over the envelope while chanting a low incantation. Eric told Sehun to try tearing it. He gripped the paper and felt a strange reinforced resistance. The material wasn't just harder, it kept its original feel but turned indestructible. Upon impact, Eric looked quite proud of herself. For something this complex, you'll need a pro. That professor of barrier construction is your best bet for mastering this legendary skill. It was so complex even a professor would struggle. That barrier expert had married into the family. Your family, I'm listening, she offered. As she spoke, Lee Sehun studied the envelope's mysterious seal, sensing something strangely familiar about it. He instantly saw through the deception. It was just a clever smokescreen. Eric watched frozen in pure shock as the unthinkable happened. Without a second thought, Lee Sehun ripped the prestigious envelope clean in half. Eric stared, her mind racing to process his reckless actions. She couldn't believe it. How had he mastered the complex Anoi family barrier arts in such a ridiculously short amount of time? He tossed the scraps aside with a casual shrug. Barriers are interesting, he noted. Thanks for the tip. I think I'll sign up. Now go enjoy lunch with your shadows, he added, walking away. Immediately, her two frantic bodyguards rushed to her side, looking terrified. My lady, are you injured? They cried. Eric glared at the shredded paper on the ground, her mood turning absolutely sour. He had treated her grand invitation like common trash. Who exactly was this guy? Lee Sehun was truly an enigma she couldn't solve. At the following day's ceremony, all eyes were glued to Lee Sehun. The entire arts department was buzzing with intense curiosity and envy. He used to be just another face in the crowd, but standing beside the elite, Eric had thrust him into the spotlight. The rumors were spreading like wildfire. Everyone wanted to know their secret. People even claimed they had seen the two together yesterday. Lee Sehun let out a heavy sigh. Fame was a burden. No matter where he went, the gossip followed him like a shadow. If Eric really liked him, they would have had a real spark. So, he asked, is there a screening for this class? They told me there was a test first. Eric led him toward the restricted barrier construction site where the real challenge was waiting. They arrived at a dense, mystical forest. Several students were already there, wandering aimlessly, as if searching for a ghost they couldn't find. Lee Sehun realized this was essentially a magical treasure hunt. He hated puzzles. This was going to be an annoying waste of time. The combat department was so much simpler. You just hit things. After scouting the area, he confirmed his suspicions about the forest's secret. It was just a low-level visual illusion. With one powerful stomp, Lee Sehun sent a shockwave that shattered the entire barrier instantly. A teacher gasped in disbelief. You passed. News of the feat quickly reached the elite barrier professor's ears. The lady is interested in that genius boy, a messenger reported, handing Professor Perry a surveillance photo from his glowing phone screen. The image showed Lee Sehun walking casually beside Eric. Even though applications had tripled, Perry wasn't smiling. He had a secret agenda. A certain high-ranking young master had also made a special request. To satisfy him, Perry decided to turn up the heat on the exam. This year we're adding the dazzling soul maze, Perry announced. This legendary barrier was designed to twist the senses and break the mind. It was a labyrinth of pure confusion. Unless you were a master of ritual arts, you wouldn't even realize you were trapped inside. For a normal person, escaping was almost impossible. It was a death trap for the weak and the unprepared. Eric offered no help, watching silently. Yet Lee Sehun simply forced his way through the maze with sheer overwhelming willpower alone. The professor was left speechless. Listen up, he shouted to the survivors. You are now officially members of this class. Your rankings will be determined by your scores. Suddenly, a cocky, red-haired student stepped forward with a smirk. I'll go first. He was desperate to show off in front of Eric. Professor Perry gave a dismissive wave to start the next phase of testing. The test is simple, Perry explained. Sustain the barrier before you, then destroy it, using only your raw magic power. A crimson magic circle ignited beneath the student's feet. As the signal rang out, he slammed his palm down with everything he had. Speed and precision were everything here. The target was a complex barrier with a spectral spider acting as its living core. The spider sensed magic through the web-like threads constantly darting away. If the spider survived, the web would just keep regenerating. It was a race against time and exhaustion. Soon the red-haired boy began to falter as his energy drained away. His magic wasn't enough to cover the whole ritual. He decided to ditch finesse and go for a brutal explosive strike. Energy erupted from his palm in a desperate burst. He finally crushed the spider, but his performance was far from perfect. 2 minutes and 23 seconds, Perry noted coldly. Learn to understand the structure before you go swinging like a brute. The boy looked back at Eric, hoping for a spark of admiration, but Eric didn't even acknowledge his existence. She hadn't even blinked. After him, a string of failures followed. No one else could handle the tricky spider barrier's defenses. The losers were banished to the basic class. Finally, it was Eric's turn to step into the testing circle and show her worth. She didn't rush. Instead, she stood perfectly still, analyzing the intricate flow of the spiderweb's magic with cold precision. Within seconds, she spotted the flaw. The core wasn't in the middle. It was hidden at the very edge of the structure. With a flick of her wrist, the entire web collapsed. The room fell into a deathly stunned silence. How had she done it? She didn't just break it. She dismantled the ritual pattern with surgical grace and total dominance. The spider was sliced to ribbons instantly. This wasn't just passing. This was the skill of a true master of the arts. Eric's performance proved she was truly worthy of her future S-rank status. Her 23-second run was impressive. However, by elite textbook standards, she was still 2 seconds too slow. Then the instructor called the final student Lee Sehun. As Lee Sehun stepped forward, the teacher carefully gauged his presence. On the surface, he looked completely ordinary. Instead of attacking the barrier immediately, Sehun lowered his head, analyzing the complex structure of the glowing spiderweb. The crowd was baffled. The clock was ticking. Was he frozen in fear or just completely clueless? Lee Sehun ignored the whispers. He realized this barrier utilized a mechanism identical to ink-heavy darkness. If his strike didn't hit the critical threshold, the barrier would simply repair itself. He needed surgical precision. He had to apply the exact amount of stimulation in a single perfect burst. One tiny error would mean failure. Confused by the delay, the teacher moved to intervene. But suddenly, Eric raised her hand to stop him. "Do not interfere with his test," she commanded. The stunned teacher froze in his tracks immediately. At that moment, mana surged in Lee Sehun's palm. A concentrated cluster of flame poured into the web's core. The fire crawled along the patterns like molten gold. Within seconds, the flames had consumed the entire spider structure. He was using the test to verify if he could condense this energy into ink-heavy darkness itself. The room fell into a deathly silence. Before anyone realized what happened, the invincible barrier shattered into pieces. Internally, Lee Sehun was electrified. He had done it. He finally mastered the refinement of ink-heavy darkness. With the test over, he simply turned and walked away. Rankings meant nothing now that he had his answer. One examiner noted the time 7 minutes and 45 seconds, but the chief examiner saw the real truth. "Next time he'll break it in seconds," the chief muttered. Sehun hadn't just broken a barrier, he'd mastered it. He had derived an entirely new dismantling formula on the fly. That wasn't just skill, it was pure genius. Eric watched him with a newfound spark of excitement. If he fused ritual arts into forging, the result would be terrifying. Soon after, Lee Sehun submitted his application for intermediate forging. He just needed a mentor to guide him. The instructor expected zero interest, but within 3 minutes, the application list was absolutely overflowing with elite offers. Meanwhile, at Vice Dean Michael's office, the atmosphere was cold. Not a single soul had signed up for him. To make matters worse, Michael's son had plummeted below 10th place. The humiliation was written all over his face. Suddenly, Michael's pupils contracted in shock. The department head announced she would personally oversee Lee Sehun's forging session. Sehun looked at Ryuha, feeling helpless. He never expected such a high-ranking official to clear her schedule for him. She claimed she was just there to inspect his strength, but Sehun didn't believe that for a single second. He began the first stage, Ink Dark Shadow refinement. He chose the most brutal path, the Dark Shepherd method. He placed the material into a void of lightless darkness, using his magic power like a precision blade. He meticulously stripped away impurities using raw mana alone. It was a process that demanded godlike control. The volume shrank while the purity skyrocketed. It was less like forging and more like reconstructing the laws of matter. Ryuha watched in a daze. The first stage was finished instantly. His compression skills were beyond human limits. 1/4 of the original size was the absolute limit. Any smaller and the material's performance would collapse. They quickly entered the second stage. One tiny deviation would cause the furnace temperature to spiral into a catastrophe. Sehun poured his crimson flame magic into the furnace, sifting through the chaos for the perfect heat. He stabilized the flames into a state known as Guardian Wildfire, locking in the temperature with absolute perfection. Then came the third stage. He began striking the dark substance with a hammer wreathed in that divine wildfire. He hammered relentlessly until every distortion caused by the trait vanished. Ryuha felt her own heart racing in suspense. Even with flame immunity, the physical toll must have been agonizing. Just how much mana did he have left? Sehun didn't falter, reshaping the glowing metal again and again to forge the weapon's ultimate outline. Hours bled into the night. Ryuha, exhausted from the sheer intensity of his work, couldn't help but yawn. Eventually, she fell asleep right where she stood. But for Sehun, the legendary refinement was only beginning. The hammer struck again, forging the weapon's soul. Hours passed, and Ryuha's eyes grew incredibly heavy. At midnight, Ryuha fell asleep while standing, yet the steady rhythm of refinement continued without end. True refinement required a relentless storm of hammer blows. Sehun was currently only E rank. Sehun had been hammering for an eternity. The abyssal substance was compressed until it screamed. Flames roared. Inside, as the metal underwent a divine evolution, suddenly the chaotic distortions in the material finally stopped. Afterward, Sehun melted the condensed shadows. Ryuha watched trying to decode the legendary forging process. He poured the liquid darkness into a mold, using casting instead of forging. But such raw power usually twists and deforms the mold. Just as failure seemed certain, the unthinkable happened before her eyes. Sehun unleashed a barrier-breaking strike to freeze the instability. In that gap, he carved a magic circuit. With surgical precision, he wove mana into the darkness. In a flash, the final treasure took shape. System Alert Ink Bamboo Bracelet completed. To break prejudice, one must embrace a touch of reckless madness. Though its true potential sleeps, this creation already defies human logic. The system chimed with another announcement. Sehun has obtained the Scale Dark Spirit Dominator rank D. Only then did he exhale deeply. His labor wasn't for nothing. He had birthed a masterpiece called the Ink Bamboo Bracelet. It was a medium-rare quality artifact. This item absorbs the wearer's mana to unleash explosive tide surge. At last, a triumphant smirk appeared on Sehun's face. He had succeeded against all the odds. But as Ryuha admired the item, her stomach gave an untimely, thunderous growl. She was mortified. She tried to hide it, but her hunger was legendary. Sehun politely pretended he heard nothing. The air was thick with awkwardness. Ryuha whispered, "So this is resonance. It's truly a miracle." He nodded. He had forged 4 in total. Though average now, they possessed a hidden potential. With a bit more effort, they could trigger a set bonus with terrifyingly fierce explosive power. "You worked so hard for me, yet I can't give you your weapon," he said regretfully. "Please accept this snack as compensation." Ryuha's stomach roared again. She was absolutely famished. Her hunger was undeniable. Ryuha then activated her unique secret art, the powerful soul furnace. She took a bite and her eyes widened. The taste was absolutely perfect for her palate. It felt like crispy fried batter crumbs, exactly the flavor profile she loved most in the world. She thought it was a lucky coincidence, unaware that Sehun had planned this from the start. He had long ago mastered the art of tailoring things to her specific tastes to gain favor. It worked perfectly, making her fall for his charm. Still, she couldn't stop herself from drooling. Ryuha then asked when he would finally sell her the legendary 5-colored flame blade. Sehun refused to part with it, making her think he was just holding out for money. But the truth was different. He needed that gear for the upcoming monster subjugation course. Besides, hunger is the best seasoning for a warrior like you, he joked with a playful wink. "When I have gear to spare, you'll be the first to know." Ryuha finally felt reassured. "I'll wait then," she replied. That was as much as Sehun could forge for one day. Ryuha urged him to rest since it was late, but as the hero stood up, he swayed. His legs gave out instantly. Ryunha moved like a flash, catching him in her strong arms. She frowned, worried. "Are you okay? You've pushed your body way past the breaking point today." This posture made Lee Sehun incredibly flustered. He had clearly overestimated his own stamina reserves. "Sorry for the trouble," he muttered. Ryunha glanced outside. "I'm taking you back to the dorms." He immediately refused, making her think he had a fear of heights. He tried to explain himself. "It's not the height," he stammered. "It's just, won't people get the wrong idea seeing us like this?" Ryunha didn't care at all. She scooped him up in a perfect princess carry and jumped. It was embarrassing, but having a beauty carry him was better than collapsing in the dirt. As they soared, a woman below watched the sky, unaware the flying figure was actually two people. She was still waiting stubbornly for Lee Sehun to keep his promise for their late appointment. By the next day, the school's social media was exploding. A viral news post topped the charts. Eric had stood outside for 3 hours without moving. Lee knew she had come looking for him. No matter how urgent she'd return later, suddenly a man in a headscarf strode into the room. "Listen up, I'm taking over your tools application course starting today," he announced. For his opening lesson, he gave a single command: "To the training center. Last one there runs laps." Lee Sehun recalled this was meant to be theory, but why waste time overthinking it? He took off toward the center immediately. However, as the race began, Lee Sehun fell behind. The gap between him and the class widened until he was dead last, earning a harsh penalty. Sehun didn't complain. He just turned around and began his laps. The instructor watched him unimpressed. He'd never seen such pathetic stamina. How did this kid even pass intermediate forging in the first place? Shaking his head, the teacher ignored him to address the others. Tools and application was usually a dull theory class, but the recent flame blade hunt had changed everything. The curriculum was overhauled. Dangerous hunters were targeting high-rank blacksmiths who forged fire element blades. These flame blade hunters were notorious. Sehun remembered this tragedy clearly from his past life. Back then, the case went unsolved. Now the class shifted focus toward actual swordsmanship. The teacher called Sehun over and thrust a blade into his hands to test his potential. "Give me one swing," he ordered. The sword was light, but Sehun's ink bamboo bracelet weighed him down. Moving was a struggle, but a crude technique flashed through Sehun's mind. It would have to do. He lashed out, but the professor blocked him with zero effort. The classroom erupted in mockery. "He's so slow, did those laps kill him?" they jeered. Yet the professor noticed something odd. Sehun's stance was flawless. His strike was surgical, as if the blade itself sought the target. But he seemed too hasty. Suddenly Sehun lunged again, and this time his gaze turned cold. The teacher froze. The pressure radiating from Sehun was suffocating. With a single devastating arc, it felt like Sehun intended to take the man's arm. The teacher's heart hammered against his ribs. Where did a student get such terrifying killing intent? In that split second of hesitation, Sehun's cold steel was already resting against his throat. He was completely suppressed by a mere student. "Where did you learn to fight like that?" the professor gasped. Even Sehun was surprised it worked. He'd just improvised that move 10 minutes ago. Thinking fast, he claimed he'd learned it online. "I just watched some viral combat clips." He lied. Miraculously, the professor bought the excuse. "To master it from social media, you're a genius. Want to learn properly, I'll recommend you to Akokov." By that afternoon, Sehun arrived at Akokov's class only to find a total disaster waiting. A desperate blonde student was literally clinging to the instructor's leg, begging for a chance. "Let go, I told you, I've got nothing to teach you," the long-haired man barked. This was the legendary retired S-rank hero, Ma Wangsu, the infamous swordbreaker. In his past life, he was a washed-up drunk. Now he was actually a respected professor. Ma Wangsu glared at Sehun. "Who are you?" Sehun introduced himself as a first-year forging student. He presented his letter of recommendation. Beside him, the blonde guy grumbled under his breath. Apparently, this blonde kid was Babel Academy's top prospect. Everyone sized Sehun up skeptically. He looked like a nobody. "You want to be my student?" Ma Wangsu asked the blonde guy. "Fine. One condition: defeat this kid first." Sehun didn't hesitate. He accepted the challenge. The rules were simple. The first valid strike wins the match. It was a one-shot showdown. Han's barrette dropped into a lethal stance. Begin! At the signal, he lunged like a predator. Ma Wangsu watched Sehun closely. The boy had completely relaxed, letting all his tension melt away. He was trading raw power for fluid flexibility. Normally, grappling would be the perfect counter. Just as that thought crossed the professor's mind, Hans reacted with a calculated maneuver. Ma Wangsu sighed. This was why he hated prodigies, even before the first blow. They were already locked in a mental chess match. Suddenly, Sehun exploded forward. No one expected it. The blonde suddenly halted his charge and lunged low, locking his arms around Li Hun's waist with monstrous brute strength. Li Hun instantly triggered his mana burst bracelet. A sickening crack echoed. As his fist shattered the blonde's nose, how had his speed increased so fast? Li Hun glanced at Ma Guangsu and smirked. Is this my win then? Ma Guangsu sighed. Start training tomorrow. The blonde was absolutely ecstatic. Li Hun was accepted too. Tomorrow their hellish training at the hall began. Ma Guangsu pulled Li Hun aside, demanding to see his secret sword technique. Li Hun nodded and obliged, rushing toward the master with total focus. But with one effortless strike, Ma Guangsu completely neutralized his entire offense. Li Hun froze. This was the terrifying power of a true master. Good concept, crude execution, Ma Guangsu barked. It's a one-trick pony. If you taught that trash to anyone else, I'd break your limbs. Ironically, in his past life, Ma Guangsu was the one who taught him. I'll build you a body worthy of that technique, the master growled. Li Hun nodded coolly and left, leaving the old man impressed by his bluntness. Outside, the blonde was still waiting at the entrance with a gift. He handed Li Hun an invitation to the elite noble society's private gala. It was a den for prestigious families, the same place Eric belonged to. Turns out Eric only wanted Li Hun there to flaunt his superiority. The blonde explained it was a golden opportunity and a genuine thank you. Li Hun realized he wasn't a bad guy. He accepted the sincere gesture. While considering his elective courses, Li Hun felt a sudden firm grip. Someone grabbed his arm tightly. Wait, can we talk for a second? Li Hun's eyes widened. A girl was staring intensely at his mana bracelet. Did you forge this yourself? She asked. Li Hun nodded, wondering what she wanted. She was practically drooling over the craftsmanship. Let me enchant it for you. System A contract has been established with the target Li Kroll. Leah was a legendary genius who could jump a weapons grade twice over. They called her the industry ruiner. Her talent was truly god-tier and terrifying. Rare grade heavy ore, she shrieked, examining the bracelet like a maniac. She began muttering complex formulas, her mind racing through endless magical possibilities. She gripped her hair in frustration, overwhelmed by the sheer potential of it. Even Li Hun was unsettled by her chaotic and obsessive personality. The ore's compatibility was so high it was driving her to madness. Li Hun calmly sipped his tea. I have more. Use them for trials. That offer sent a bolt of pure electric excitement through Leah's soul. She was ready to go insane, deriving new powerful enchantment formulas next. Suddenly, a heavy hand slammed onto their table, shattering the quiet atmosphere. I have something to say. Come with me, a commanding voice growled. Li Hun bristled immediately. This had to be one of Eric's lackeys. Are you deaf? The man barked, his voice dropping into a threat. Speak here, Li Hun countered coldly. The man demanded an apology for Eric. You humiliated him by tearing that invite. Li Hun didn't give a damn. Right or wrong, this thug expected submission. Li Hun's blood began to boil. Was it Eric who sent you? Lee Sehun scoffed, shaking his head. This is my own call. She has nothing to do with this. Beside him, Leah adjusted her glasses with a sharp glint. Drop the act. Everyone knows you're just the young master's lapdog. So Eric had an older brother, and this man was his subordinate. The man's face twisted. His cover was blown. Realizing his identity was exposed, his murderous aura suddenly erupted. He glared at Leah. How could this failed woman act so tough? Was she still living in some dream world? But his crushing pressure didn't even make Lee Sehun flinch. Babel is crawling with geniuses far stronger than you, he sneered. Apologizing to the young miss would be a mercy for you. Leah didn't blink. You're just describing your own pathetic life, aren't you? She had seen right through him. His composure snapped completely. With a roar, he summoned demonic wolves to pounce and tear them apart. Lee Sehun didn't move an inch. Facing the charging beasts, he simply raised a single hand toward the fray. With a casual wave, the wolves vanished into thin air. As I thought, these aren't just simple mana constructs. You use that dagger as a medium for the illusions, right? The man's pupils contracted in pure shock. Lee Sehun spun the blade between his fingers. Too shallow. Since he made the first move, a counterattack was only fair. The system alert. The gluttonous iron blade bond has been activated. Lee Sehun wiped his mouth with a smirk. This dagger tastes like trash. He had just consumed the enemy's weapon. This was the power of the greedy iron extracted from the professor, a top-tier ability that devoured metal itself. In a flash, Lee Sehun charged. He triggered his burst ring and drove a devastating punch into the man's gut. A deafening crash echoed as the mirror dimension shattered like glass. His petty tricks were utterly worthless now. He turned to Leah completely calm. Hey, any good enchantment courses you'd recommend? I want to learn more. I heard there's a legendary senior named Leah Crodell. Know her? Soon after, the man clutched his stomach and limped away, only to be stopped by a sudden figure. Wait, let me see that dagger. It was Eric. The man immediately handed it over with a respectful bow. Eric's voice was ice as she warned him not to tell her brother. She would handle the family head herself. Just as she suspected, the medium was engraved with an anti-confiscation spell. Eric felt a surge of confusion. Had Lee Sehun really combined Professor Robert's theories with her own witchcraft to create a perfect countermeasure? She realized the truth about him. His refinement talent was B rank, but his witchcraft, that was easily S rank. Suddenly, Lee Sehun received a notification. Ding, you have established a new connection with Eric. He was stunned. How did he suddenly trigger Eric's bond? Had she been lurking in the shadows this whole time? Not that it mattered. He'd already secured his prize, the medium he had snatched from his opponent. Using it raw was too crude, but paired with his Black Spirit mage powers, it would become a deadly tool. Later, Lee Sehun arrived at Professor Kim's class. He'd actually been looking forward to this session. But hearing the same basic theories over and over was starting to get under his skin. He already knew it all. That's enough talk, Lee Sehun muttered. It was time to move from boring theory into actual practice. By simply tweaking the mana array, the same piece of metal could completely change its physical form. Mastery of form conversion determined the true potential of any weapon. A blacksmith had to know their metal. Professor Kim swept his hand, and the weapon instantly reverted back into a simple, raw lump of iron. Today's challenge was metal deformation. The goal used the mana array to create a precise 3-centimeter dent. The assistant distributed the materials. Listen up. This iron is extremely sensitive to any mana fluctuations. One wrong move and it warps. Be incredibly careful when you begin the handling process. Lee Sehun glanced at the professor, lost in thought. It seemed the man hadn't totally abandoned magical refinement. Once class started, the room became a total disaster zone. Students were failing left and right. Some turned their iron into puddles, while others created metallic monsters. Professor Kim's face grew darker by the second. To make matters worse, none of them could restore the iron. Just then, Lee Sehun stepped forward. He handed over his perfectly completed iron block and signaled for an inspection with a confident look. Hans grinned at him from the side. Fast as always, I guess I wasn't the only one practicing in secret. Professor Kim was speechless. In the entire class, only 2 students had successfully conquered the first trial. Clear this stage to advance. The professor showcased a complex array challenging them to replicate it perfectly. They began molding the iron block's internal structure like a master solving a Rubik's Cube at high speed. Hans smirked at Lee Sehun. To him, the boy seemed clumsy, lacking both the precision and raw speed required. Victory felt certain. After the first round, the professor assigned a second, even more intricate shape to forge. Hans's fingers became a blur. The iron quickly transformed. I'm a natural genius, he gloated, admiring his work. It looked flawless from every angle, but Professor Kim's voice remained chillingly calm. Hans, return it to normal. Hans froze in confusion. Why restore it now? He reluctantly obeyed, but his smug expression quickly turned to horror. The mana array was utterly shattered. Professor Kim explained that the ingot couldn't handle such a violent shift. His entire approach was flawed from the start, yet Hans's pride wouldn't let him accept this crushing defeat. "I followed your instructions exactly," Hans barked, but the professor's gaze sharpened with a stern, icy warning. "A blacksmith must respect the metal. If you can't reverse the array, you haven't transformed it, you've destroyed it. From today, focus on quality over flashiness." Hans seethed, glaring at Lee Sehun in a fit of jealousy. Did this loser see the flaw coming? No way. He looked like he was just daydreaming the whole time. Suddenly, Lee Sehun's hands moved with lightning speed. The air around the anvil began to hum with power. The mana array rewrote itself instantly. The iron block pulsed, deforming and correcting itself like living liquid metal. Seconds later, the ingot was pristine again. The class stood silenced, and even Professor Kim was visibly shaken. "Show me that sequence again," the professor demanded. Sehun hesitated. This wasn't exactly what the man thought. The secret was sensitivity tuning. Without that specific prep work, restoring an ordinary ingot would be physically impossible. Sehun obliged, flawlessly repeating the cycle. The professor's eyes widened as the simple truth finally hit him. The key lay in the material's sensitivity. It was a basic principle, yet one even a master had overlooked. The legendary flame craftsman Kent, the strongest hero to ever conquer the floors, had left an unbreakable formula. For ages, no blacksmith could solve it. It remained the ultimate wall, a fundamental riddle of the world. And Lee Sehun had just poked a hole in that ancient mystery. Class dismissed, but the professor wasn't done. He pulled Sehun aside, presenting a rare ore that shimmered with a dangerous blood-red intensity. It was a welcoming gift for choosing Babel. "You've been a massive help," Kim admitted, handing over the prize. System prompt flame gemstone acquired. Rare quality. It pulsates with highly purified energy from the depths of hell. Absorbing this essence would permanently evolve his crimson flame. This was exactly what Lee Sehun needed to ascend. Professor Kim had researched Sehun's fire affinity. The boy's heart raced. This gift was far too precious to ignore. Then came the real offer, an invitation to an exclusive elective. Sehun knew exactly what it was: weapon origins. The professor was stunned by his intuition. Sehun nodded. This was Babel's most prestigious and well-funded course. Yet doubt lingered. In his past life, the name Kim In-cheol was completely unknown to history. Had the professor met a tragic end before, regardless, Sehun was in high demand and couldn't pass this up. He officially enrolled, and the two shared a firm handshake. A new, powerful alliance had been forged. "I look forward to our future, Professor." System prompt affinity with Kim In-cheol has reached level 1. Sehun gained a new trait, flame infusion. He could now store massive amounts of heat within any metal. But he had a crazier idea. If metal can be forged, why not the human body itself? Conflicting elemental attributes usually meant death for a blacksmith. Precision required a single, pure focus to succeed. Most chose the easy path. But Lee Sehun wasn't most people. He had a different, deadlier plan. He had pushed his internal mana to the absolute breaking point, draining himself dry to prepare for the change. His starving body began devouring the crimson flame essence in reverse, creating a vacuum of pure power. He needed to construct a mana circuit dedicated solely to the flame. He took a deep, steadying breath. The process began. He wasn't just crafting a sword. He was forging his own soul into a weapon. System prompt. Crimson Flame has evolved from F rank to E- new skill refinement, Divine Art S rank obtained. Prompts flooded his vision as his stats exploded. The path to becoming the ultimate blacksmith had truly begun. System alerts flashed. He unlocked S-rank Divine Refinement, and his attributes began to surge with power. Mastering the Divine Refinement art was brutal for his weak body. He hadn't even had the chance to test it once. In his past life, he was told to use every scrap to forge his vessel. This time, he'd gamble everything. He would stake every resource to achieve perfection. Allies or enemies didn't matter. He would live without any regrets. On the second day, Lee Sehun headed back to the academy. It was time for the final touches on his work. These pieces needed to be perfect before being shipped off. Around him, the workshop erupted into a rhythmic frenzy of iron. Everyone was hammering away like madmen. Lee Sehun felt his own internal energy swirling in a chaotic, unstable mess. His rhythm was shattered and his movements were completely out of sync. But there was no time for a slow adjustment. Despite his body being pushed to the breaking point, his hammer never wavered. He shaped a blade with pure desperation. After finishing the sword, he plunged it into the quenching bucket. Steam hissed as he finally let out a heavy breath. This blade was decent, but he couldn't stop here. Meeting the basic standards might secure a larger budget for him. Instead of being average at everything, he chose to push one single piece to its absolute god-tier limit. He began the grueling process of polishing the weapon. 2 hours flew by in a focused, sweaty blur. Suddenly, Lee Sehun heard it again, that otherworldly sound of waves. It was the echo of the world itself cracking apart. That sound meant he was forging something legendary. He wasn't just chasing sharpness. He was carving intent into the steel. A brilliant white light erupted from the blade. This masterpiece was the White Light Great Sword, forged through pure will. Only a true master could imbue steel with such power, using just the fundamentals. Lee Sehun had unlocked a new form. He gained the C-rank White Light Sword form. The system evaluated his creation, ranking the weapon's quality as rare. Infusing it with mana would skyrocket its lethality. Since Lee Sehun used basic iron, this result was a total miracle. His legendary past life skills were finally waking up. He was vibrating with anticipation for what came next. While he ascended, his classmates were drowning in despair. Many were ready to quit the brutal path of the smith. Morning arrived and Lee Sehun met with Leah as planned. He needed to witness her enchantment without any prying eyes. Leah had led him to a secluded hidden spot. Enchanting was her soul, a secret she refused to share with anyone. But for Lee Sehun, she would make an exception. They soon arrived at the mysterious Akov smithy. Leah shouted for her grandmother to greet their guest. The old woman's eardrums were nearly blasted by the girls yelling. Grandma Helena snapped back, annoyed by the noise. But when she saw Lee Sehun, her expression shifted into pure shock. She teased Leah, asking if this handsome boy was her boyfriend. Leah just ignored the old woman's playful badgering. Lee Sehun introduced himself as the top student of his division. Finally, he learned that Grandma's name was Helena. Helena urged him to start working immediately. They had a mountain of work to finish before they could think of resting. The influx of freshmen meant the workload was insane. Leah then guided him toward a specialized workshop for high-level enchantment. Lee Sehun scanned the tools and felt a chill. This old lady's skill level was far beyond anything he'd imagined. Why would a master of this caliber run a hardware shop? He then spotted a strange, colorful palette of powders. These were ground-up mana stones. Usually smiths only used one color, but she had a whole rainbow of them. Was she using these to mend broken enchantment formulas? Leah laughed, confirming his suspicion with a knowing smirk. It was a perfect way to earn money and practice without worrying about costs. She began sketching a pattern onto a pot. Suddenly, a golden radiance flared from the base of the vessel. Lee Sehun had heard rumors of their supposed slump. His rival called them losers, but Lee Sehun saw the truth. Their intense focus was a rare, divine talent. He saw the genius behind their struggle and the breakthrough point. Such singular focus was itself a legendary talent. While Leah worked, Lee Sehun explored the shop. He quickly found materials that hummed with intense mana resonance. His fingers began to itch with excitement. It had been way too long since he last engraved the white light. Grandma Helena noticed his interest and dared him to try. She promised he could take anything if he proved his skill. He found the slump's cause and the path forward. This level of absolute focus was truly legendary. While Liao was busy, Lee Sehun scouted the area. He found materials vibrating with pure mana energy. His fingers were itching to work. Engraving that sacred white light was a feeling he deeply missed. Grandma challenged him to try. She said he could take anything from the pile with his skills. He could even claim the rare custom whetstone if his craftsmanship proved worthy enough. Ignoring her status, Lee Sehun scanned the rack. He grabbed a completely ordinary dagger with focused intent. Grandma was stunned. He'd chosen a blade with a perfectly aligned axis, lacking even a hint of distortion. It was a pick fit for a master. For a whetstone, he chose the one with perfectly compressed mana. With his godlike control, he kept the blade stable even at its limit. Then the sharpening began. Grandma watched in a daze. Was this really a freshman who had only just started school this year? Suddenly, Leah shouted from behind, "Finished!" But seeing Grandma's pale face, she knew something was very wrong. Leah caught on instantly. "Did you try to lecture a junior and end up getting schooled instead?" she teased. Grandma immediately smacked her head. "Shut up, do not disturb him while he is in the zone." Another hour passed before Sehun finished. This was his current peak, though he vowed to improve. After hearing that Grandma kicked them both out, Leah was speechless. "Why is she mad? Let's go." Once they left, Grandma stared at the blade. Then her brother, the swordsmanship chief professor, walked in. She told him to be quiet. He had come to the shop looking for new kitchen knives. They bickered about his restaurant job. "You're a chief professor, yet you're hiding in a kitchen," she snapped. The man ignored her until he saw the dagger. In an instant, his expression stiffened, and he froze. Their gazes turned deadly serious. "Did you sharpen this while drunk?" he asked, unable to believe it. Grandma denied it. He wondered if other masters did it, but she gave a truly shocking answer. "A freshman sharpened this," she said. The man was unconvinced, but Grandma swore she wasn't lying. "He really is a freshman." Now the mysterious Sehun was an enigma in both of their minds. What was his background after leaving Sehun, and Leah wandered campus discussing Grandma's past as a professor. She'd retired from metallurgy earlier this year. Over 10 years, the department had lost its best professors. Soon it would be the weakest link in Babel. Leah didn't want to talk about the department's decline. She only cared about her enchantment. Sehun told her basics were solid and beyond any criticism. She tried to act modest, but her pride was visible. Then Sehun pointed out her fatal flaw. "You knew a better path but chose not to take it. Refusing to grow is the real problem. A creator's imagination is a weapon, and you're suppressing it." Leah flared up, feeling challenged on the spot. "You think I don't know?" At that moment, Sehun reached into his coat and handed her a blade. "Listen carefully and focus. If forging is like placing a stone, underwater magic is its surface shadow. That's why magic feels like a dream." Suddenly, red lotus flames erupted from the small, sharp dagger. White vapor wrapped around the steel. Enhancement isn't just paint. It must be driven deep into the core. Stack layer upon layer to reach the peak. With a flick, the dagger pinned into a nearby tree. The moment it hit, the white vapor surged. A flash shot skyward, slicing the leaves in half. It wasn't formal enchantment, but he knew she'd get it. Even a hesitating genius can find their way. Leah caught on and asked to borrow the dagger. She promised to make it perfect before returning it. Sehun didn't mind. Leah laughed loudly. "Thank you, I love you so much," she shouted happily. Before he could react, she vanished. A system prompt appeared. "Connection with Leah Level 1. He laughed. He hadn't expected his simple advice to create such a bond. His eyes sparkled with a mysterious light. The path ahead was becoming interesting. Sehun walked toward his dorm, the cool night air biting. He knew the professors would be looking for him soon. His skill had already left a massive mark. The academy was full of monsters, but he was the predator. Destiny was already beginning to shift gears. Every step felt lighter as he planned his next move. The quest for power was just beginning. "Just wait," he whispered to the wind. "The real show starts now." His presence was truly terrifying. Back at the smithy, the professors were still in awe. They had never seen such a perfect edge. "We need to find him," the professor muttered. "This kid is either a genius or a god." Leah was already working, her heart racing with new ideas. She would never forget this fated night. Sehun watched the stars. He was ready to conquer this world, one legendary blade at a time. Connecting with her felt effortless. Today he finally spotted one of the 3 legendary hounds during the clash of the young mad dog and the extermination demon god. Sehun was stunned. Eric still trailed him. He warned her to vanish. The sensation of being watched was suffocating. Eric insisted she would only observe from the shadows. Sehun then harvested the ore from her bond. It was an association contact stone, a high-grade gem of mediocre quality. He also claimed Leia Cradle's flawless high-grade ore. Suddenly, the ranking match for the Marshall Hall's Battle of Glory ignited. and the arena combatants prepared for war. Their host was the youngest prodigy Professor Blueside. First to appear was a powerhouse fourth year aiming for the peak of the Akal Cup. She was the IMA family heir, a lineage famous for producing legendary S-rank heroes. For 3 years, she dominated the Marshall Hall records as a reigning AA-ranked champion. Her name was Thalia Myers, the warrior who had conquered the Hero Tower's Holy Swordmaster. Sehun remained unimpressed. He didn't know her. The person he was truly waiting for was finally stepping up, the successor of Korea's legendary Fire Dragon Spear. As the top-ranked third-year spearman, he was a star, finally beginning to blaze with power. A smirk touched Sehun's lips. Fate reunited them. Mad Dog, his ride-or-die partner. Without him, Sehun would never have reached the endgame. Soon Mad Dog and Thalia clashed. Despite her feminine grace, the raw strength she unleashed made even Mad Dog's heart rattle. He spun his spear through endless forms, but Thalia treated the fight like a mere game. With a lazy sword flick, she sent waves of incinerating flames roaring straight at him. Mad Dog reacted instantly, sweeping his spear to block the fire. Thalia stood completely unfazed. Hiding one hand behind her back, another slash unleashed a fresh wave of strikes. Even for a young talent, Mad Dog's performance seemed tragically low. Had he lacked proper support, Sehun was baffled. The biggest problem was clearly that weapon. Mad Dog's gaze turned to ice. He was getting serious, but the sword was already at his throat. The power gap was an abyss. He yielded as Thalia offered a mocking smile. She told him to try harder. Maybe then she'd use half her strength and take him seriously. The crowd erupted. Thalia's aura was so oppressive that the audience could hardly breathe. As the host prepared for interviews, Sunha fled the stage. Thalia's ego was soaring. She needed to conserve her energy for the 9th-place challenge ahead. Bathed in Thalia's shadow, Mad Dog looked utterly pathetic. Sehun saw the kid spiraling. He turned to leave immediately, catching Eric off guard. She was surprised he was walking out early. Sehun had zero interest in this farce or that annoying blonde. Just looking at her was irritating. Eric sensed his simmering fury at the spectacle. At least he wasn't there for her brother. Suddenly, Thalia's gaze locked onto the freshman. Her eyes followed Sehun's exit. After the duel, Sehun tracked Mad Dog to a nearby lot. Seeing the once great hero so broken was pitiful. Despite his flaws, he was essential. He was the core of the death squad who slew the great demon king of Ruhai. Sehun needed to win him over before he snapped. He opened by mentioning the match. Sunha was impressed he was found, but he immediately sensed something was dangerously off. The guy in front of him looked like a top-tier elite student. Why was he here? Sehun felt the tension thicken as Sunha's reaction intensified. He wanted a moment, but Mad Dog roared for him to get lost immediately. No matter what Sehun said, Mad Dog told him to vanish. He was done. Even when Sehun promised a benefit, Mad Dog spat that he hated mediocre weaklings who thought they were his equals. He told Sehun to save his pathetic words. "Beat it, Blacksmith. You're out of your league." Leah Hun stayed quiet, remembering the savage beast Mad Dog once was. Back then, he was a monster. This version was actually polite. Suddenly, a crimson aura flared around Lee Soon's fist. Words clearly weren't working anymore. It was time for a physical negotiation. Mad Dog's gaze turned cold as ice. "Still won't back down," Mad Dog hissed. Leah Hun smirked. "Listen up. The Firewheel Spear's legacy ends with you." Those words struck a nerve. Mad Dog froze, then vanished, leaving only a blur where he once stood. In a heartbeat, he closed the distance. He reappeared inches from Lee Soon's face, radiating pure lethal intent. He threw a ruthless punch, but Lee Soon had already read the move. That strike would never land. Impact. They recoiled instantly. Leah Hun didn't push his luck. His goal was to save the guy, not kill him. He needed to reel Mad Dog in, yet that effortless block sent a shockwave of realization through the warrior's mind. He'd countered a mana-charged blow. Clearly the top student title wasn't just for show. Mad Dog's resolve wavered. Perhaps this kid was worth listening to. Residual mana hummed in the air between them, thick with tension. Boom! They collided again. A massive explosion of flames erupted, sending Mad Dog flying backward through the dirt. As the smoke drifted away, Leah Hun stood tall, unscathed. Mad Dog stared in utter disbelief. How could a stranger control his unique mana traces? Had Leah Hun blocked the energy or straight up stolen it? He charged again, relentless. Leah Hun gave a soft chuckle. This guy really did have a hair-trigger temper. Mad Dog went full throttle, purple mana exploding from his pores. This fury likely caused the Flameflower massacre. He squeezed his fist's knuckles, popping like gunfire. This was the raw, unbridled power of a living legend. Hammer-like blows rained down on Lee Sehun's guard. Even his Seeker of Steel skill was screaming under the pressure. As a fist aimed for his skull, Leah Hun's heart grew heavy. Peace was officially off the table. If he couldn't reason with him, he'd have to break him. But suddenly a lone hand caught the punch. It was Blondie Talia's little brother. Mad Dog recognized him instantly and barked a question about the top student. Mad Dog pulled back, hissing, "Get lost." Blondie didn't hesitate, shoving Lee Sun toward the exit. "Move, don't poke the bear anymore," Blondie warned. Lee Sehun still had one last message for the beast. "Zip it and go," Blondie snapped. Left alone, Mad Dog's rage cooled into a bitter sting of regret. "I almost dishonored my master's name," he muttered. But Lee Sehun's name was now burned into his memory. Outside, Blondie wouldn't shut up. "Why did you provoke that psycho? You'd be a corpse if I hadn't stepped in." "Quit exaggerating," Leah Hun replied. Dying was unlikely, but things definitely would have gotten messy. System connection established with Yongseong Ha. The first step of the plan was a success. Affinity extraction was online, but the Mad Dog he remembered was far more complex than this hothead. To truly master the Bondstone, Leah Hun needed to skyrocket their affinity to legendary levels. Still, Blondie had his uses. "Hey, did you break your hand catching that?" Leah Hun asked. Blondie barked a laugh. "I'm solid steel, man." Then his expression turned deadly serious. "More importantly, you've got a target on your back. What did you say to my sister earlier?" Leah Hun shrugged casually. "Not much. Just called her a bit of a royal pain in the neck." That explained her sudden interrogation. Blondie's face went pale. "Dude, my sister is super interested in you now. You're a dead man." Leah Hun hadn't realized her S-rank senses were that insane. "She's an S-rank hero moron. She can hear a pin drop from miles away." Blondie sighed. "Don't take this lightly. My sister is Lee Sehun cut him off before he could finish." "Petty and plays dirty, right?" Those words nearly sent Blondie into a full-blown panic attack. He scanned the area frantically, only exhaling when he realized his sister wasn't lurking nearby. What did she even do to make you hate her, Holy Sword St. Talia Myers, a living myth? She was monstrously strong and had even claimed the legendary Holy Sword, but to her it was worthless. She tossed it aside like trash. Then one day the world's greatest hero vanished without a trace. In her place rose a nightmare wielding the bones of a demon god, the demon god of extinguishing light. That monster had Talia's face. Leah Hun let out a long breath, haunted by the memories of the future. "I just can't stand that look." Lee Sun waved Blondie off and turned to leave, but Blondie wasn't buying it. He was certain something went down between Lee Sehun and his sister. Suddenly, Blondie's phone buzzed with a new message. It was from his sister. "I found a fascinating new friend. Expect regular updates about him from now on." Just like that, Blondie became their forced middleman. Then another chilling text arrived from his scheming sister. "I need your help," she wrote. Blondie went stiff. Had she actually overheard their entire private conversation just now? The realization sent chills down his spine. The next morning arrived quickly. It seemed Lee Sehun had pushed Mad Dog to his limit yesterday. Hans glared at Lee Sehun from the front row, fuming. "I'm surpassing you today for sure." Suddenly, a frail old man in a wheelchair rolled in. This was Doba. For 2 weeks, he'd be teaching attribute forging. The atmosphere turned heavy instantly. Every student looked miserable. This professor was legendary for being insane. "Before we begin," Doba rasped, "I'm returning your forging evaluations and your budgets for the new semester. Step forward when I call your name." One by one, the students collected their results with bated breath. Lee Sehun was called last. The class expected a massive budget for him, but the actual result shocked everyone. His budget was a flat zero. Doba explained that Lee Sehun's work was so flawless, it was heading to public auction. It would be sold alongside the senior's masterpieces. His budget depended entirely on how high the final bid climbed. He'd have to wait. Lee Sehun saw through it. This was likely Vice Dean Michael's scheme to mess with him. But since Professor Kim hadn't intervened, it wasn't a real threat. Lee Sehun simply nodded. Understood. I'll wait. The lecture moved to handling residual mana. Doba announced a special student volunteer had arrived to assist. Lee Sehun's eyes widened as the volunteer stepped inside. It was Mad Dog. The tension in the room spiked instantly. He was clearly here for Lee Sehun. After a quick intro, the professor dove into the complex mechanics of practice. Listen up. Residual mana in forging comes in two forms. Doba began pacing before the silent, focused class. First is the basic charge type. Second is the independent type, which generates its own energy from the air. The latter is superior, but incredibly difficult to master. There's no fixed formula for a mana core like that. It shifts based on material's technique and the creator's soul. Doba then gestured to his assistant to begin. Show them the charge type, Doba commanded. Suddenly, a violent surge of crimson mana erupted in Mad Dog's hand. Fire mana was notoriously wild and unstable. Controlling its residue was a feat only a true master could achieve. Mad Dog unveiled his signature technique, the Flame Wheel Blooming Spear. The entire room gasped in pure disbelief. They were struggling to manage simple furnace fires, yet he was weaving flames like a god. It was a different level. Don't waste this chance to learn from the best, Doba noted. Your assignment is due next Thursday. Get creative. But remember, he warned, it must strictly follow the topic on the board. He then led them to the forge. The heat of the forge hit them like a wall. Change your clothes and get to work, Doba barked at the students. The students were buzzing. A legendary figure was standing right there. Even Hans wanted to make a connection. A single word from Mad Dog would be a badge of honor, but as Hans approached, the mood turned ice cold. Beat it! I can't stand weaklings, Mad Dog snapped. Hans froze, retreating in total soul-crushing embarrassment. The others shrank back, their excitement dying instantly. Mad Dog's gaze was fixed on only one person, Lee Sehun. Ignoring the intense stare, Lee Sehun walked toward the exit, but a booming voice stopped him dead in his tracks. Hold it right there. Mad Dog demanded to know how much Lee Sehun actually understood about his powers. Lee Sehun didn't flinch. They say your strength is measured by the number of flame wheels you can sustain. The Sectmaster can hold 8. You seem to handle 3 with ease, meaning 5 wheels should be your limit. Mad Dog scoffed, following him closely. So what, knowing that doesn't make me any stronger, does it? Lee Sehun stopped and looked back. You once reached 7 wheels, didn't you? Mad Dog froze, completely stunned. Then, without warning, you lost control of them all. It was a secret Mad Dog had never told a single soul. Not even the Sectmaster knew his secret. How do you know that Lee Sehun pointed out his flawed flow? Your talent for fire is immense, Lee Sehun explained, but your mana flow is fundamentally broken and erratic. You have massive reserves, but you're too afraid to let them erupt. You're only putting in half your heart. Mad Dog's eyes shook with desperation. Do you know why? Can you help me fix it? Lee Sehun spoke at last. I have a theory. Mad Dog's face beamed with hope, but Lee Sehun's next words stopped him cold. I can solve it, but I need a reason. Mad Dog understood. Knowledge always came with a steep price. Tell me and I'll grant 3 favors. Lee Sehun immediately proposed his first ruthless condition. For every piece of advice or helping hand offered, Mad Dog would pay an equal heavy price. Second, no matter how difficult the choice, Mad Dog must consult Lee Sehun before making any decision. Lee gave him a deadline. If he didn't answer before Lee reached the forge, the deal was considered dead. Mad Dog agreed instantly, without hesitation. Lee Sehun offered a faint knowing smile. He was the same relentless Mad Dog from his past life. Lee Sehun strode toward the furnace, stunning everyone as he prepared to work. He began forging without even drawing a blueprint. He mixed fire and dark attribute ores in a 7-to-3 ratio as onlookers scoffed. The mana will just vanish. Is this how a top student is supposed to work? Li Sehun ignored them, heating the metal until the elemental mana overflowed like a storm. With a sweeping motion, he poured concentrated fire magic into the heart of the furnace. The professor gasped. Thermal displacement. No wonder Kim and Chiel invited him to the auction. While others saw a standard move, Mad Dog witnessed a masterclass in elemental manipulation. He watched in disbelief as Li Sehun rhythmically pumped the bellows with his foot. He forced fire mana outward and pulled dark mana inward, creating a delicate high-stakes balance that ultimately formed a perfect ring. It finally clicked. Mad Dog understood the secret at last. The secondary attribute that once hindered his spear was now being perfectly mastered. But by using this new method, his power level suddenly dropped back to the 6th wheel. Li Sehun was surprised, but 5 black flame wheels were far deadlier than 7 ordinary ones. The Flame Sect regularly sent instructors to verify the strength of all their training heirs. If Mad Dog fell below 6 wheels, he would lose his status as a legitimate inheritor. Li Sehun's heart tightened. Try your original method again. But Mad Dog just shook his head in despair. He could no longer control the dark attribute mana at all. The instructor arrives tomorrow, meaning he has no way to fix things today. Losing his status meant being expelled from the sect. Was there a solution within one day? Li Sehun placed a firm hand on Mad Dog's shoulder. Will you do anything to keep your position? Mad Dog nodded desperately. That was enough. In an instant, Li Sehun extracted a high-quality ore from Mad Dog's body. The fire and dark mana wavelengths began to resonate in perfect harmony. Li Sehun laughed. The ultimate solution was finally here. First, he would modify the weapon himself. Then they headed to the elite private training ground. Only the top 100 or top 30 in the academy could enter this hall. Mad Dog changed the display to his childhood home. Li Sehun teased him about being homesick. It was a gift from his master. Without another word, Li Sehun began crafting tools. With a sharp flick of his finger, the black stone shattered instantly into pieces. The weapon was finished in record time. Mad Dog stared in shock at the result. One spear was awkward enough, but now he was expected to master twin spears. Left hand for flame, right for darkness. Li Sehun's instructions were absolute and firm. Mad Dog took a deep breath and struck, but his movements suddenly locked up completely. He was lost. In truth, the problem was simple. His subconscious was leaking dark mana. Infusing multiple attributes caused interference, especially since he had spent a lifetime suppressing his dark side. Once he mastered handling both simultaneously, the first wheel would be an easy task. Li Sehun even handed over his own precious bracelet. Mad Dog froze in shock, feeling the weight of the gift and the path ahead. As expected, Li Sehun had prepared multiple gears. 3 hours in Mad Dog's adaptation with both hands was accelerating. Li Sehun felt a wave of relief. This efficiency was no fluke. It was a future training method Mad Dog himself designed. He wanted to witness Mad Dog's current peak. Suddenly, the warrior shifted into breathing mode, and his physical output exploded. His strength doubled instantly. When the session concluded, Mad Dog stared blankly at Li Sehun, who stood his ground firmly. Li Sehun was analyzing every movement, gathering crucial data for a custom masterpiece. With the right blade, Mad Dog's potential peaks. Balancing his dual attributes would finally become effortless. Still, this was just a fraction of Li Sehun's grand master plan. He kept his expectations low for now. Mad Dog never truly believed a mere freshman could forge a legendary divine weapon. Li Sehun felt a flicker of curiosity. Why was Mad Dog so obsessed with claiming the title of sect inheritor? Was there a hidden motive? Mad Dog swung his blade, revealing that his master's dying wish was for him to lead. As a loyal disciple, he lived only to fulfill that command. An orphan with nothing, he was raised by an S-rank legend. His guardian was the Flame Sect's founder, now retired due to crippling wounds. Though his prime had faded, his legacy remained. Even without his former power, the Master's word was absolute law to Mad Dog. Their father-son bond was unbreakable and deep. Currently, their bond sat at a mere level 3. If it were higher, Li Sehun could extract even greater hidden potential. Mad Dog remained suspicious, questioning Li Sehun's true motives for helping him. The blacksmith needed a convincing lie to survive. A solid justification was required to earn trust. He spoke of the 6 great demonic domains, the world's most treacherous lands. In the myriad demon swamp, thousands of monsters roam free. Sehun declared his intent to conquer these nightmare realms. He needed elite guards for this journey and rare materials to forge their ultimate arsenal. This was a strictly business arrangement. The future flame sect leader possessed both raw power and immense fortune. Thus, an alliance between them was the perfect strategy. Trust isn't built overnight. "Don't be naive," Sehun smirked. "Nothing in this world comes without a heavy price, right?" Mad Dog raised his blade, understanding the game perfectly. If Sehun wanted a pawn, the cost would be high. He had one condition: secure his throne as the next sect master. In return, he would follow Sehun into hell. They would brave the demonic domains together. Looking into those eyes, Sehun saw the same fierce warrior he once knew. History was repeating itself perfectly. In their past lives, Mad Dog made the same vow: "Forge my steel and I'll kill gods." Seeing the past and present collide so flawlessly almost made Sehun laugh. The wheel of fate was finally turning in his favor. He revealed the crimson bead, asking one last time if he was certain. Once Mad Dog nodded, mana surged into the artifact. "Hate me if you must, but I will place you on that throne." An hour passed in what felt like a heartbeat. Suddenly, a 7-wheel instructor named Kong Han-woo entered the grounds. The tension in the air shifted instantly as he approached. Mad Dog's voice turned icy. These were the Main family's elite disciples sent by the Patriarch to witness their supposed sparring session. They were here to broaden their horizons. But Mad Dog didn't let the man finish his arrogant introduction. He cut him off. "The succession isn't settled yet, so watch your mouth." Kong Han-woo merely scoffed, itching to put the mutt in his place. Mad Dog shut him down immediately. "I'm aiming for the 7th wheel. I have no time for your games." The instructor was stunned. A training-obsessed fool actually had the audacity to aim for the sect's leadership. It was laughable. That ambition had to be crushed here and now. Kong Han-woo knew his backers would protect him if things turned ugly. After more annoying provocation, Mad Dog finally relented. This pest wouldn't leave him alone unless he beat some sense into him. As the duel ignited, Mad Dog released a tide of overwhelming power. The atmosphere crackled with his raw, unbridled fury. Kong Han-woo mocked the crude twin spears in Mad Dog's hands. "Shut up and fight!" Mad Dog growled, ending the banter. The instructor snorted. Had Mad Dog forgotten the Patriarch's order, his dark attribute was a filthy stain that needed to be suppressed. His impure flames were considered a disgrace to the clan. Mad Dog didn't care for words. Actions would do the talking. "One strike is all I need." Kong Han-woo ignited his own flame, determined to show the massive gap in their status. As their flames clashed, terror gripped the instructor. Something was horribly wrong. His sacred fire was being swallowed whole. His flame ring was being consumed by darkness. Suddenly, his own weapon began to scream and vibrate under the immense pressure. With a deafening crack, the blade shattered into pieces. Kong Han-woo stood frozen, unable to process his total humiliating defeat. One move was all it took. Mad Dog threw his insults right back at him. "Seems your weapon was the crude one." With the fight over the promotion ceremony loomed, Mad Dog was finally being recognized as a formal instructor and official heir. He was ascending the ranks of the Flame Sect, but to truly rule as Master, 2 final trials still remained. To rise, he must first conquer the 8th wheel and earn the instructor's total respect. Sehun doubted Mad Dog's odds, but he remained confident in his own raw power. He vowed to dominate through sparring, though internal duels would soon become a public war. Sehun saw the truth: Mad Dog's path to the throne would be paved in blood. "Name your price, cash or materials." Mad Dog declared willing to pay anything for absolute victory. He had one more mission. Sehun was stunned by how fast history was repeating. He noticed Mad Dog's gear decent, but ultimately just borrowed tools that couldn't handle his might. Mad Dog agreed. If Sehun could craft masterpieces in hours, what could he create next? He demanded a weapon truly worthy of his strength, one that suited his savage fighting style. Suddenly, their bond surged to level 2. As their trust deepened, a formal alliance was forged. Every deal they struck together generated a rare bondstone, a manifestation of their connection. More transactions meant the bondstone would mature faster, unlocking even greater power between them. At the auction house, the air was thick with tension as powerful figures filled the hall. The host grinned, kicking off the prestigious second-year tech auction for the Institute's elite students. Sehun and Eric watched as a garment of S-rank white tiger fur was brought out. It was softer than silk, but harder than steel, a literal death trap for ordinary blades. The host proved it instantly. The test weapon shattered upon contact, leaving the crowd gasping. Next came Joseph's blue shell sword. Eric whispered to Sehun, questioning the brutal demonstration. Most only see the fur's hardness, but its true secret is far more complex and terrifying. The tiger's traits vary, but the fur specifically mimics the sharpness of whatever touches it. It erodes a weapon's durability by reflecting its own edge, turning strength into a fatal weakness. Eric panicked. If true, wouldn't the white light greatsword be at a total disadvantage? High cutting power usually means low durability, a fatal flaw when facing such a legendary defense. Leah realized it was a calculated trap designed to ruin Professor Kim's reputation and work. As previous lots sold, the spotlight finally shifted to Sehun's mysterious new creation. The host roared, "Behold, we shall now test the white light greatsword from Babel Academy." With a violent whistle, the blade struck the white tiger hide with enough force to shatter. Impact. The sword vibrated wildly, but instead of breaking, it was violently repelled from his hand. The professors sat in stunned silence. What had they just witnessed? The impossible had happened. The blade remained flawless. Not a single crack appeared. The crowd erupted at its true value. Shock paralyzed the room. Then a desperate voice screamed a bid of 600 million credits. Sehun stood up, ready to unveil the secrets of his masterpiece to the mesmerized audience. A standard killing blade should have snapped against such a weave, but this was no ordinary weapon. The sword draws mana from the atmosphere, condensing it into a razor-thin edge that defies logic. It forms a secondary crystalline layer over the steel, acting as a ghostly blade of energy. This wasn't just sword aura, its sharpness transcended ordinary light, a true instrument of death. Eric finally saw the truth. That strike was the manifestation of the killing blade's power. When two killing edges meet, they don't clash. They resonate, amplifying into a storm of destruction. Using a tuning stone, Sehun began to harmonize the chaotic mana swirling within the core. As the stone glowed, the erratic energy stabilized, realigning the weapon's internal circuits with precision. By carving a new path for the flow, he evolved the weapon beyond its mortal limits. Light exploded as the rank ascended. The system confirmed its legendary new rare status. White Light Greatsword rank D rare quality. This blade now possessed a skill to amplify lethality. Its grade had evolved from high to rare. Sehun calmly signaled to adjust the price. The starting bid jumped from 1.1 million to 5 million credits instantly. 1 million was just the start. Tension filled the air. That low price was bait for a literal bidding war. The crowd was ready to kill for it. Someone instantly screamed 30 million. Suddenly, paddle number 3 shot up. The bid hit 100 million. Blondie jumped up roaring 200 million. Not to be outdone, Eric followed. 230 million. The host's voice trembled with pure hype. It had been years since a lot sparked this frenzy. No one could keep their cool. Sehun watched, completely paralyzed. After all, his own bank account was nearly empty. With only a few thousand to his name, these figures felt like alien currency. Then a voice silenced the entire hall. A staggering 600 million. The room went dead silent. Every eye turned to find the owner of that massive bid. Blondie's heart dropped. His Yandere sister's command echoed in his mind, "Bring that blade home or else." But this was madness. 600 million, a true whale, had entered the deep end. The message was clear: little shrimp should just clear the way. That meant Eric and Blondie were out. No matter how much they burned with resentment, they simply couldn't touch that price. Finally, the White Light Greatsword sold for 600 million. Professor Kim roared with laughter. Even he hadn't expected this windfall. Sehun's mind was reeling. This was a king's ransom, more money than he'd ever dreamed of seeing in a single lifetime. Minutes later, his phone buzzed. 500 million had been deposited. Thanks to Ryu Hana's status, there were 0 fees. By waiving the commission, the venue saved him a fortune. Yet a question remained. What was her true goal? Why did she want the blade? It turned out Ryu Hana planned to test its edge in a high-rank danger zone. Using a masterpiece like this for simple training would be a crime. Lee Sehun wanted to see its true power himself. He was itching to witness the white light greatsword in a real life-or-death struggle. He had the perfect location in mind. If you're looking for a challenge, how about Silver Moon Mountain? It was the primary site for the freshman subjugation trial. Ryu Hana seemed hesitant, but Lee Se-hun knew how to push her buttons. He made her an offer she couldn't refuse. He promised to forge her a custom masterpiece later. That was all it took. Her doubts vanished like smoke in the wind. "It's a date then," she agreed. Lee Se-hun smirked. He knew her hesitation was just a calculated play to get more. Behind the scenes, the UD Group's chairman, Jürgen Kruger, loomed large. He was the world's most powerful living summoner, a titan. During the Great Demon War, he lost several divine artifacts. Legend said one was buried deep within the Silver Moon Range. While the stage was set for adventure, Blondie slunk back to his sister. Her smile was sharp enough to draw blood. "So," she purred, "you returned empty-handed, didn't you?" Blondie began to stammer out pathetic excuses, his voice trembling with fear. She didn't even grant him a glance. "Since you've failed, start thinking about how you're going to make this right," she commanded. A chilling idea took root. They still shared classes with Lee Se-hun. She wanted Blondie to deliver a very special message. "Give him my warmest regards," she whispered. Success would mean finally discussing his inheritance with their father. Failure was not an option. Blondie's rank was slipping fast. If he didn't act now, he'd lose his top spot and his future forever. He was desperate. Driven by greed and fear, he took the bait. "I'll get a sword from Lee Se-hun," he promised, his eyes dark. His sister nodded, her eyes cold as ice. "At any cost," she echoed. She couldn't forget the way Se-hun looked at her. She replayed Se-hun's words from their match. He had looked at her with pure disgust, as if she were something revolting. Uncomfortable, that face.